Endangered, hearing from each of the scientific advisory groups to hear what they've been up to for the year. And some permitting work at the end of the meeting that John Cart will lead, as well as Matt. We have one from the Flora SAG. So any comments from the public not related to the agenda? And I guess I'll say, Kate, I don't know you. Are you filling in for someone, or are you here as a member of the public? All right, well, hearing nothing.
I don't speak for Kate.
Oh.
I know Kate. She works with Jim Andrews.
Oh,
maybe
okay,
maybe Jim
yeah,
was-
okay, that could very well be. So, okay.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. I'm trying to help Jim get on in the other room. We're having some technical
okay.
difficulties. So
Okay.
hopefully we'll
okay.
both be on in just a minute.
Perfect, thanks so much. Additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda. I guess Hannah's not here. I was gonna ask a question about when we have one of our permit conversations toward the end of the meeting, and we have a location confidential issue. Do we need to go into executive session at that point and not record minutes? And I guess I'm looking to our FWD folks to maybe address that question.
Well, this is recorded,
Right.
So you probably do need
Go
to
into executive,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I think what you would probably need to get from Hannah is like like a legally viable reason for
Right,
going into
okay.
executive session, like
Yeah.
you would say for personnel, right? And probably this is to protect the location of
Right.
a specific population.
yeah, okay, all right. So I will propose that change the agenda when we get down to discussion of permits later in the agenda. Anything else anyone wants to mention in terms of the agenda? All right, perfect. So next up, approval of the minutes from our September meeting. Thanks again, Roz, for taking those and keeping a record of what we've been up to. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Or I'll second.
Okay, great.
Just got a closing date a couple days ago, so I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna stay up here until it closes at this point, just because it's been kind of a tough one.
Any comments or discussion about the agenda, the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
See you, Trev.
Aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Minutes pass. I wanted to put out a potential change in the meeting date for our April meeting. I think I had that down as the 14th, I believe. And I've just been like, maybe I guess it was the 15th. I've just been sort of triple booked for that day. And wondering if we could do another day that week. Probably Wednesday would be the best for me, the next day, the 16th, but wondering what that looks like on other folks' calendars.
Works for me.
I won't be
Alan,
able
I'm
to
gonna
join you,
be
but I will
on-
check with me.
With the road time, I don't know if I'll be able to make it.
I'd probably have to be remote too, this man.
That doesn't overlap with Northeast Fish and Wildlife Conference, does it?
No.
It's following.
What does Friday look like? The 18th.
Fridays in
That's
general
better for me.
don't
Yeah.
work for me. Yep. Fridays
Does
don't work for
the-
me.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Do we? How about if I were to go back a week, what does the 9th look like for people? Wednesday the 9th.
That works.
I think that's
Okay,
for me.
okay, awesome. Let's book it.
okay.
Wednesday the 9th, we will change our new meeting to, thanks everyone. My day on that Tuesday got really kind of complicated. So I appreciate that. And thanks. Okay, let's see, Ellie, I don't know, Matt, can you see Allie's comment in the chat?
Maybe if I pull up the chat. Oh, there.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Roz is addressing it.
Oh. Yeah,
Oh,
with
but I don't have a
accessing the
solution.
Right, yeah.
Allie's having the same problem, Matt, that you did
Huh.
with the
Yeah.
getting in the SharePoint site and
Yeah.
Authenticator, and
And
I don't know what's going on.
yeah, I've already gone round and round with it in a couple different bouts without being able to resolve things, and tired of beating my head against the wall. So just let it lie for the moment.
But you're in. Oh, you're into the Teams meeting. You can't.
I'm in
get
the
into
Teams meeting. I can try once again to get into the ESC drive. I doubt it
Oh.
will work.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm in Teams as like, you know how in Teams you can log on through another agency, like you could log on as State of Vermont. I'm logged on as University of Vermont. So I can't get Authenticator. It's just like, I don't know how to get that back added to Authenticator to have the State of Vermont account coming up. I
Okay.
can't find anything on, I Googled it and I can't, I don't remember how I originally set it up. How it
Yeah,
got on my
likewise.
phone.
Okay. All right. Well, you're here. That's the important thing, Allie. And I can share screens for some of the stuff that we'll be talking about. So, okay.
Paul has
Sure,
his
that'd be
hand up.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, can you guys see me? Am I on the screen?
Nope.
No, we got a
Yeah.
big PW though.
Okay, 'cause my camera is on and I don't know why you can't see me. My camera is on. But anyway, you don't need to see
Oh,
me.
there's a
That's
little
okay.
dip switch usually right over your camera that sometimes slides closed. It's almost impossible to see. You may want to check that because it looks like there's a little light around the edge of you, which may mean it's mostly slid.
A little, huh.
Also, Paul, another option is like at the top of Teams where you see the little camera icon, there's the little caret right next to it, sort of the upside down less than equal, less than sign. And if you drop down that, it will show you some different options for camera. Because sometimes mine will default to my phone and actually it's using my phone's camera. So you just, that can be an option too.
Okay. I don't see that, but don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. Well, we can see what we can do about ironing out some of these technical challenges as either the meeting or the the year goes on. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Secretary Moore, for some
Sure.
updates from Anna.
Sure. So certainly don't need the full half hour unless folks have questions for me, but thought I could just offer a few updates. Later this afternoon, the governor will deliver his budget address. The agency's proposed budget for FY26 will tops $330 million, which is a reflection of an incredible amount of federal funding that continues to flow through this agency for grants and contracts. probably put an asterisk by that, since understanding the new administration paused all that work this morning, at least in the near term. This is up more than 50% since 2018 and is almost a threefold increase since I started in this role. And it's a doubling since 2021, I'm sorry, and a threefold increase since I started in FY18. So it's really dramatic. But almost all of that increase is going to pass through grants and contracts. It's not for the work of the agency staff, for new staff at the agency per se. In terms of things that I think are going to be front and center during the coming legislative session, climate policy is probably at the top of that list in terms of areas of interest for this committee. The governor also has significant packages around housing and public safety and education reform. But I think there's some real challenges around the deadlines contained in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the cost of meeting the obligations that that act has created, and even just the kind of technical feasibility, workforce capacity to do all of the things the act envisions. So I imagine that will be an area of pretty significant discussion in the legislature this year. The Act 59 work, which is 30 by 30 conservation, continues to move along. As I'm hoping you've all seen, the inventory was published. The final version of the inventory was published, I think, back in September. And so now we're shifting into phase 2 of the Act 59 implementation work, which is to develop the statewide conservation plan. There's a team of folks from ANR and VHCB that are working to organize that. We have hired a consultant, Future IQ, which is the same outfit that worked on the Forest Futures Roadmap for FPR that they developed 2 or 3 years ago now, to help facilitate the stakeholder engagement components of that statewide conservation planning process. The current deadline in statute is the end of this calendar year, and we agreed yesterday to seek a 6-month extension on that from the legislature, just recognizing it is a big lift and we would be challenged to have the kind of public engagement we'd want, absent buying ourselves a little bit more time. So we'll see how receptive folks are to that. And then the last thing I jotted down as a note just to reflect back is one of the things we've spent some time on over the last several months is putting together a list of what I'm calling underfunded mandates. The legislature has assigned this agency a significant body of work over the last several years and generally provides some, but not all of the resources we've indicated are necessary. The one that may have the strongest intersection with this committee is Act 181, which is the Act 250 reform bill. And there is work in there around tier 3. Somebody's not on mute. Mark, can you mute him from there? Maybe from that.
It's Jim.
Oh, now he's muted. Somebody muted him. The Act 250 reform bill, there is significant work, particularly that comes to the Fish and Wildlife Department around tier 3, which is this idea of critical resource areas. So those areas of the landscape that would be held to a higher bar than current Act 250 standards. And as you may recall, the bill established tier 1, which is essentially designated centers, and removed some of the Act 250 requirements. The vision was the vast majority of the state would sit in tier 2, which is kind of our existing Act 250 requirements. But then there would be this tier 3 critical resource areas where there would be a higher bar applied. The legislature during last session took a couple runs at that. And every time they defined it, came up with something that picked up 75 to 90% of the landscape. So I think they determined that it needed a more refined approach. I believe the governor is likely to propose, instead of having it be a de facto go straight into law, that we would actually do the work and have a conversation about it on the other end before it's adopted. but we had asked for a couple of staff positions to support that effort and didn't receive those. And so sort of just know that that's going to be an area of active conversation this session too. Beyond that, I do think housing is going to suck a lot of time and attention. I suspect the governor's budget will have some really significant investments in trying to jumpstart housing, but they really are pushing infill development in our designated centers as the preferred approach and trying to remove barriers to those types of projects, which I think is good news in terms of larger landscape connectivity and pressures that we would otherwise be facing. So can pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Any questions for the secretary?
I'm going to stay till about 10 a.m. So if things come up as you go through the Fish and Wildlife report, happy to jump back in then too.
Well, maybe I'll ask a couple. One, with respect to the list of underfunded mandates, I mean, it seems like that's something that we hear a lot from Fish and Wildlife. Did Fish and Wildlife make it on your list as well? Okay,
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a going concern for this agency,
Yeah,
right? In
yeah.
that, there are a lot of big ideas and really important projects, but asking us to take them on without resourcing them just becomes really a challenge, I think, to honestly staff morale, where folks feel like they can't be successful in their job because they're asked to do more than can possibly be accomplished in a normal work week.
And does that, I mean, when these bills are going through committees, I mean, does that come up? Is that part of the discussion?
It is, and I think there's some amount of hand waving and general acknowledgement that capacity is needed, but it makes it harder to pass a policy bill if you can't make the case to your colleagues that you have the resources to go with it. To me, probably the sharpest case study, I guess, is the last year's Flood Safety Act, which doesn't really implicate Fish and Wildlife. It was a DEC bill. But we had program managers go in and testify. We needed 6 years and 18 staff positions to implement the scope the legislature laid out. And they came back and said, you can have 3 years and 11 positions. And we're like, it's not really a negotiation, right? Like, this is what this is what we're telling you it would take to do this work. So we'll be back in this year to try to adjust the schedule. But it's one of those where, like, this isn't a bargaining, right? Or there's nothing to bargain here. Unless it's, you want to give us less positions and more time to do the work. But the challenge has been, I think, compounded each of the last several years, right? The Environmental Justice Bill didn't contain sufficient resources. The Flood Safety Act, Act 181, Act 59, which is the 30 by 30 conservation bill. Like, all of them have mandates for this agency with less than sufficient resources associated with them.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I will ask you one more.
Sure.
You can feel free to decline if you want, but I was listening to this podcast about, challenges of climate change and new administration and all of that sort of thing. And, how do you wrap your brain around those things? So I was just going to ask, what are you most optimistic about? Sort of in, I guess, it could be this legislative session. It could be this, new governor term, could be just the world in general.
In the client space, one of the things I found absolutely astounding was the team put together the resources we have for climate work across state government this current fiscal year. And it was $524 million. And I literally looked at it as I was reading a draft, and I was like, clearly the decimal point is in the wrong spot. Right? And then they sent the supporting documentation. And Vermont is really poised to invest $500 million in climate work. Not all of it will occur during fiscal 25. Some of it is like there's the $100 million Solar for All program, which will roll out over several years. There's what's called Homes Act money that's flowing through the Department of Public Service for weatherization and electric panel upgrades, which is like 70 million, again, over several years. And then there's a lot of the hazard mitigation grant money that we are eligible for as a result of the 7 federally declared disasters we've experienced over the last 18 months. But the idea that there's $500 million of investment that we can see right now took my breath away.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed we were anywhere close to that.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's really exciting. There's so much focus sometimes on what we're not doing as opposed to what we are doing, and trying not to let what we're not doing or what we could or should be doing drown out the fact that there's some really incredible work being done on the ground. One of the other things I took away from that same summary was, maybe I'll just ask you all, do you have any idea how much we're investing in weatherization right now annually? Which to me is like the foundational no regrets climate policy, and that benefits, it disproportionately benefits, I think, low and middle income Vermonters.
I do not.
$45 million a year right now, 4,000 homes a year, which is just like, it is, and that's up from 1,000 homes a year in 2020.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like we've scaled this program dramatically, which is also really exciting. And so part of my focus in the coming session is making sure we maintain those federal funds are going to start to wind down, particularly for about half that weatherization money is federal money. And so how do we backfill that so that we don't lose this momentum we've built up and can keep doing 4,000 homes a year? Because we know there's well over 100,000 homes that actually need weatherization. So,
well, that's great.
Thanks.
I appreciate you answering the question.
Sure.
All right.
Oh, Paul's got his hand up too.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just a quick question to follow up on that. So what's the state doing or your department doing to get that word out, that good positive word? I mean, that's so great to hear and important. Like you said, it's, all the bad news is drowning out all the good stuff. And we just kind of witnessed what happened in our country when all the bad news just kind of drowned out all the good stuff that was really going on for quite a while. But yeah, so what can you guys do to get that out there?
That's a great question. And I think it's a challenge in that it's not the narrative necessarily people want to hear. I think I've been really intentional in trying to, when asked to give climate testimony, make sure I flag that is what we're currently doing and not let the sort of, I think absent that kind of information, there is an assumption people are making that we're doing nothing right now, or what we're doing is year to year and will come to an end. But pointing to all those investments, we did produce a little report on that for the legislature. I think the reports we submit to the legislature largely go unread unless there's a specific question that gets asked and we're able to point back to the reports we produced. But Paul, that's a really important point. And I've been thinking about kind of a couple of op-eds I'd probably need to write in this space, but flagging that level of investment is probably an important cornerstone for one of them to not let, while we certainly have work to do and there is need for more investment in this space, there's a pretty incredible body of work underway.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks,
Sure.
Terry. So I will, I probably should have given you a chance to introduce yourself.
Well, now you have the
Yes.
moment.
Sure, I will pass it over to you.
Sure. Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Shortsleeve. I am the interim commissioner for Fish and Wildlife, and I've been in this position for less than 2 months now, I guess maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks. But previous to that, I have worked for the department for 8 years as a habitat biologist. And I was just talking to John earlier. I think when I first started that job, I came in here to meet everyone, and that was the last time I've really been involved with the Endangered Species Committee. Similarly, feeling overwhelmed then and am now, but it's nice to be back. In my work as a habitat biologist, I worked, with private landowners and foresters, improving habitat for all sorts of species on private lands, and did quite a bit of work with the habitat stamp program, which worked very closely with Mark Labar in several projects to raise money and put habitat back on the ground for a lot of songbirds in the Champlain Valley. And so that was really good work, really fun work. And then I've also been working recently, focused on the relevancy of our department, moving that forward as we, kind of look at the cultural changes that are happening. I'm trying to make sure that our department and the work that we do is relevant to the public and the things that they're interested in. And so I guess in this position, I'm really excited about being able to elevate the work that this committee does and promote it whenever I talk to senators and legislators and just the general public, because I think it's really important work, and happy to be able to have a background in some of that and be able to talk about it a little bit more to the general public. I've already gotten questions from senators about the state wildlife action plan and how that works and deadlines and things like that. So I know it's stuff that they are very interested in and talking about. And then we're also working on a real comprehensive financial assessment for our department, which is, again, moving into the future, looking at relevancy and also how we can just change our budget model, essentially, and be more kind of encompassing of all the work that we do as a department. So those are kind of the big things on my list right now, as I'm learning this position. So happy to take questions. Perfect.
Well, I was going to say, what does a comprehensive budgetary assessment look like?
Yeah, so it's looking at, similar to what Secretary Moore was talking about, of looking at all of our funded and unfunded work that we have to do every year, getting a real solid inventory of our state lands, the infrastructure on our state lands, including, our fish hatcheries, WMAs, our camps, all of those things, looking at kind of our forecast for the next 5 years of what we're going to need, and then also comparing what other states have been doing to kind of change their funding models to, again, be kind of move into the future. And so packaging that all up and start, picking out what we want and how to move forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really asking just because the toughest question to address is always what, are the things we should stop doing?
Right.
And I just was kind of wondering, is that part of the equation?
I mean, I think unfortunately there's probably going to be some of that, just looking at what we're funded and the people that we have, going to capacity. But yeah, I can't talk more about it without really having the list in front of me. But yeah, I don't want to cut out anything that's good.
Right. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the challenge is the current funding model for the department is unsustainable. Every agency of state government through the budget instructions this year was told to assume a 3% increase in our general fund allocation. And the department's component of that, so $330 million budget, 3% general fund increase is about $1.5 million agency-wide. The department's component of that was about $250,000. And the department ended up receiving about $1.2 million of general fund, because otherwise we would have had to eliminate whole programs, just based on the availability of federal funds and special funds, which in this case are largely licensed sales. So encourage all of you to buy your hunting and fishing licenses or a habitat stamp. Because that money is really essential to the department's operations. that's not sustainable, right? We saw a 12 to 15% increase in general fund for fish and wildlife this year. That's building on a 21% increase over the 2 preceding years. So now we're at like a 30 to 40% increase in general fund in the fish and wildlife budget in 3 years, at a time where rest of state government on average has seen a 10% increase in their general fund budget. So something is going to have to change. And that's the work Andrea is speaking to. And we know it's going to be hard because it will require inevitably, I think, some choices to be made. But the flip side, and one of my concerns, is always you end up sort of stripping your operating budget in order to meet these targets, and you end up restricted in what you're able to do, the kinds of science you're able to do, because you don't have the money to support the field components and the lab components and all the other pieces that are central to our work beyond just having the staff capacity.
Yeah. Going to pass it on to John and Ross.
Sure. I guess if there's no other questions, then hit John up. Yeah.
Oh, does somebody have a question?
I'll lower my hand. I mean, Secretary Moore sort of answered the question, but I was wondering, I go back about 40 years on discussions of funding models for fish and wildlife, and they really, I guess maybe they haven't changed much, but I was wondering if, beyond the additional money from the general fund, so you're actually looking at big, impactful decisions on revenue?
Yeah, I mean, that is what that larger financial assessment is intended to include, is recognizing we have a funding model currently where a very small number of Vermonters pay into the work of the department, even though the conservation mission benefits us all. And so trying to look for ways to have sort of a bigger tent approach where the sole special fund revenue is provided by hunters and anglers.
Right.
Anything else? Other questions? All right.
Yeah, pass it to John Austin.
Well, I'll pick up on the theme for just a moment. The theme that is of the sort of financial security of the department, and first offer, I think it's safe to say on behalf of the whole department, our gratitude for Andrea Shortsleeve stepping up and taking on the role of commissioner, because that's an enormous responsibility. And from where I sit, she's doing an outstanding job. We're very fortunate to have her in that position. So,
agreed.
Lots of opportunities ahead. And also a note of gratitude to Secretary Moore, because evaluating or examining the funding model for this department is long overdue. It's been unsustainable for quite a while. And to me, the work of this committee is a great illustration of why the funding model doesn't work. I mean, this department is providing services to every citizen of this state by maintaining a healthy landscape and making sure that the populations of every species of plant and animal is safe and healthy. I mean, that's a huge responsibility. It's not just about managing the state's deer herd and the bear population and responding to the growing array of human bear conflicts and other wildlife conflicts. It's so much. I'm preaching to the choir, I realize, but just to reinforce the point, how important it is in this moment in time to figure out a better model for how we're going to support sustainable funding for all of the conservation work that we do. Another great illustration of that is Act 59. So Act 59, it's what a great vision. It promotes biodiversity conservation law and with ambitious goals for land conservation. Reality for us, however, is that we own a lot of land as it is, and we struggle to keep up with our stewardship responsibilities with the limited resources that we have. And so when we look at the idea of in effect doubling the amount of land the agency owns in a relatively short period of time. Never mind the work, the Herculean effort that will be involved in order to achieve that goal in the next 4.5 years. I'm not frankly sure that it's realistically possible, to say nothing where the money would come from. But then to start to effectively manage all of that land with the growing array of public interests and opinions about what people want to do on the land, how they expect us to manage it. Cut trees, don't cut trees, all of, the new sort of social norm of litigating some of these issues, which takes time and resources from the agency to deal with. It's a very different world than it was even just 10 years ago, say nothing of 20 or 30 years ago. So anyway, I'm very grateful that Secretary Moore has opened up this opportunity to critically explore how we can, look to the future and figure out a better funding model. Alan, you may want to share some thoughts about this as well, and Roz, you too, and Hannah and Abigail, all of those who were involved in conversations over the last 6 or 8 months with Representative Sakowicz from the House Committee on the Environment, who last year, if you recall, had proposed a bill that would overhaul the Vermont Endangered Species Law. We had some concerns with his proposal because it was in effect untenable. It was setting out statutory requirements that just were not practically achievable. But he was very gracious in stepping it back and wanting to have a conversation with all of us to explore what, if anything, should we be thinking about in terms of changes to the endangered species law. We went through a series of meetings with Representative Sakowicz, Jamie Fidel from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and others. And they were some very productive conversations. I thought in the end, one of the big learning experiences for me was to realize that, in fact, Vermont has a very strong endangered species protection law. And there's a lot of opportunity there where we could realize perhaps some improvements is more procedural than anything, which gets to the question of capacity and funding and all that. In any event, I don't know, Alan, if you were thinking that perhaps at some point, not today, obviously, because there's so much on the agenda, but maybe an opportunity at the next meeting to give a more complete overview of what came out of those conversations. So that everybody's familiar. But I learned a lot in going through that. And I also think we raised Representative Sakowitz's perspective and appreciation for law, the work that we all do, and some of the more practical challenges of dealing with those responsibilities outside of the statute. What else for updates?
Oh, yeah, I guess I'll just add that I think the challenge probably we've talked about in these meetings pretty regularly is the fact that we, in many ways, are kind of a reactive committee. So we're responding to kind of what's put in front of us. Some of it's great work, proactive by the scientific advisory groups in terms of listings or recovery plans, but a lot of it is the permitting process and how do we respond to those challenges where we've got conflicts with endangered species populations. So I think, this conversation is maybe the start of an opportunity to be able to think a little bit more proactively about ways where we can either, strengthen the statute or strengthen, perhaps the regulatory environment in ways to better protect endangered species and, try to get ahead of the curve a little bit. So yeah, I think that'd be a great conversation for the April meeting.
I guess the last thing I'll mention is last spring during the legislative session and then following the legislative session through the summer, the department made a concerted effort to spend time with legislators. So we found opportunities to invite legislators into the field to experience what our staff do on the ground. So folks went out with our botanist, Grace Glynn, with our ecologist, Bob Zano, Daniela Zarski. They went out in the field with Roz Renfrew to look at some grassland bird work on wildlife management areas. The list goes on, and I think we made some real progress last year in changing the tenor of both their attitude towards the department, as well as the type of conversations that hopefully we'll be able to have with them moving forward that are not focused on sort of the social value issues around trapping and hunting with dogs and things of that nature. So we're going to try to do similar things this year, looking for opportunities to continue to get legislators out in the field with staff, look for opportunities during the session to get staff in front of the relevant committees so they are seeing people, other than myself or the commissioner. Not that they don't want to see the commissioner, of course, but
Plenty of other people to talk to.
they benefit a lot from seeing our experts and hearing about what they do and how they do it, why they do it. Be continued.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, Roz.
Well, stepping down to the next scale of things going on. Just to know, I've been, tracking what's going on in terms of federal funding, especially state wildlife grants, which funds much of our non-game work. And we're all keeping an eye on PR funding, which includes birds and mammals work, and DJ funding, which is fish. And so that's obviously nobody has a crystal ball. But so far, SWIG funding, it has a lot of support, including from red states. They were able to get a partial apportionment for the coming year, so that if there are delays in funding, that is going to cover us for a while. And there's just this generally relatively positive news in terms of the future of SWIG funding. And I think that concern has been raised to me by staff sometimes. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone. Like, so far, so good. Our regional Fish and Wildlife Service office is saying they think SWIG will be okay. And at the same time, nobody has a crystal ball, and it's quite hard to predict anything. But I feel encouraged by what I've heard so far. So I thought that would be good to share with everybody else. Also, if people have questions, I don't know if this is too fine-grained for this discussion, but the monarch was proposed to be listed as threatened federally. So there might be questions around that. And I could dive into that a little bit if you want, or we can save that for the inverts group, or it's up to you, Alan.
Kent on?
I saw.
Kent, any thoughts? Do you want to talk monarchs for a couple minutes now?
Sorry, Ken had to go get coffee. He doesn't want to talk about it. No, just kidding. It's a difficult one, monarchs. There's a comment period, as Roz knows, until mid-March, which then there'll be a decision of whether it's actually will be listed as threatened, with a lot of rules under the 4D rule.
Yep.
I don't know. That's about it. Roz, whatever you think.
Well, they laid out some details about what the 4D rule would do, but the comment period there, I think, it could change given comments. There's a lot of sort of questions remaining about what they mean in certain cases, but in general, it would cover, it would allow, take exceptions out of season for conservation work, for agricultural activities, even if they're converting, say, CRP back to ag, back to like a cornfield. So there's a lot of things in the exceptions, but they also talk about naturalized grasslands versus ag grasslands. And there's AFWA is submitting questions about what they mean by that, and other questions just for clarification. The states are planning on submitting comments on the 4D rule. We talked about having the Northeast states all submit comments together. I don't know if that will pull together or not. And at the same time, there's also this, will this even come to fruition by March? We don't know, but it seems very worthwhile to submit comments if people are interested, have the time, take a look at those. It's a lot to be clarified yet.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I will just add, there's been some concern too from schools, believe it or not. Because a lot of schools, I mean, many of you probably raised monarchs in your school when you were a kid.
Mhm.
And but that's addressed actually in this also.
Yeah.
I think it limits, you can have under 250 monarchs in captivity or something like that. So it
Yep.
tries to capture that a bit, but what it doesn't do, or what it may do in the future, which is interstate or even inter-country commerce of monarchs, which RSAG has discussed a little bit, but I'm not sure it has been discussed at the state level about the commerce, monarch buying and selling of monarchs and the commerce of that, and disease issues. And so that may come up as an issue relatively quickly.
Yeah, I can add something briefly also, and that is that there really aren't big habitat provisions for the eastern population of monarchs. They've designated 7 critical areas for the western population, the wintering areas in California.
Mhm.
And there's some broad language about enhancing milkweed abundance and nectar plant abundance. And the proposal is relatively silent on pesticides. And that's one area where Fish and Wildlife Service is really seeking testimony. You know, I think they generally want more information about pesticide use. And then the other impact, you know, Mexico being a limiting factor in the population of this insect in a big way, but of course, there's not much we can do in Mexico.
And one more piece is that it allows for sale of 250 or fewer captively reared monarchs, but selling captively reared monarchs has implications genetically. So there's concern. I think that's going to come up too in the comments about whether we want to be encouraging that, allowing it. It's another whole issue.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because otherwise we're sort of mum on the topic.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would say that there are Connecticut is banned. Maybe I shouldn't say banned, but they have a very restrictive law about monarch commerce, as is California and I think maybe 10 other states. So it is something to discuss in the future, I think. Then that's a great point, Roz, about genetics. Thanks.
So Roz, I wasn't clear. Is the coalition of states, or is Vermont planning to comment on the proposal?
I would like to comment, work with Mark Ferguson, or maybe Kent, perhaps we could comment together. We don't have to be sending in, we'll probably have the same comments. So I would like to, but I would prefer if the Northeast states together all commented, and because we're all going to have probably the same comments. We're sort of all in the same position in this. And I think it'll be a stronger message if all the Northeast states are together, but I haven't heard anything lately, whether that's coming together or not. I'll have to decide soon. So I need to check in with the regional folks.
Other questions for Roz?
I would welcome input from Brian, Kent, others. We want to draft something together. Not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, we can talk about it, Roz, for sure. I think VCE was going to do a comment anyhow, so maybe we'll see how we all align.
Any updates, Roz, on the action plan update?
The action plan is coming along. The taxa teams are doing their work. We're so grateful for all the work that is all basically volunteer time to make this plan come together. John Cart has many moving pieces. We continue to work on having a landscape theme with Vermont Conservation Design, sort of central to this plan and linking that with SGCN needs, and creating some efficiencies that way. And tangentially, we're also working with VC to submit a competitive SWIG proposal to have VC do a bunch of modeling on SGCN species in how their needs are covered or not by VCD goals, and also climate change predictions. So that's going to be, I hope we get funded. We'll find out in a few months, but we're working. We have to submit that soon. Crank on that out. But that's all connected to the implementation of the swap. So it'd probably be an action in the swap to be looking at these other issues with SGCN and biodiversity.
Is that beyond Vermont then?
That's just Vermont.
Just Vermont.
Yep. We'll see. Cross your fingers.
How could it not be funded then?
I know. Because Vermont's so cool. It's actually really exciting because there's no other state really that has something as robust as VCD, and also all this data that the Vermont Atlas of Life, has collected, and then combining forces with the two of those powerful elements, and and doing an analysis. I mean, I don't know of any other state doing anything like that. So I think it should be #1 proposal, but a little biased.
I agree, Ross, totally.
What is there any, I mean, I kind of know the answer to this, but any updates on the sort of behind the scenes database for the
Poor John Cart. He's working hard with, I haven't had an update in the last few weeks anyway from John. They're still working on it. They're supposed to be in the final throes of working with our IT to get that done. I didn't ask him for an update before this meeting though. I should have, but
we'll see John
it's
later.
it's not there yet. But yeah, we can ask him later when he shows up.
And I guess maybe I'll just, sort of dare I ask, any news on Franklin County Airport? Anything happened in the last couple of months?
I'll leave that to John or the secretary.
Yeah, I mean, we did meet with VTrans and the FAA. Frankly, VTrans is in a difficult position right now, and that we're sort of saying you need to comply. Not sort of saying, we are saying you need to comply with state law, and FAA is making unclear assertions about federal preemption, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And it's, I think, put VTrans in a tough spot. Catherine Guessing, the ANR General Counsel, who I know most of you know, is leading on that and trying to help us get to resolution, because it's FAA says a lot of things. They don't seem to necessarily be substantiated in the CFR or in their own guidance even. And it's put VTrans in a bad spot.
Any other questions for Roz or John or Andrea? Well, Jim?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if we knew anything about potential listings for some of the turtles that we heard were going to be listed over the last year. We had expected probably wood turtle and perhaps spotted turtle would both be listed at the federal level, but they just kind of disappeared, and we haven't heard anything about that over the last year. I assume that has to do with changes at the federal level, but does anybody have any insight?
I've not heard anything.
They've just sat, and I'm afraid I don't have insight into that.
Okay.
Kind of like the tricolor bat that's just sat after being expected for many months now.
All right.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate the updates.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm unable to stay.
That's okay.
Thanks, Julie.
Dorothy, are you prepared to go 10 minutes early and give the Fight SAG report?
Yes,
All right, let's do it.
I'm going to try to turn this camera on it. Yeah, there we go. Ah. Hi, everybody. You all should have the report I sent in. I have a paper copy. I'm not going to bring it up on my screen. That's beyond my technical capability. There you go. Good job. And dog, you don't get to bark for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. Okay. It's a deal. So we're a recently formed Bryophyte SAG for those of you who aren't familiar with that. And my name is Dorothy Allard and I chair it. I've been working on bryophytes for about 20 years or so. Before that, a botanist and ecologist, but not bryophytes. We have 3 members. We have a fourth person who'd like to become a member, as I understand it, but I haven't received her resume yet. The members are Matt Peters, who's in this meeting, Eric Sorensen, who used to work for Fish and Wildlife, and me. And then Everett Marshall usually participates, and Grace Glynn usually participates. Grace would like to become a member. I'm waiting for her CV. We had a few areas of focus this past year. One was on the Vermont State Bryophyte list, and I've been working on that since I started working on bryophytes. And there's a link to that in the annual report. You can go check it out. I update it on a regular basis with new finds or corrections or rank changes. The big update this year was based upon Everett Marshall's work, helping me update the global ranks that are in the list. So those are all now up to date and the same as those that are available on NatureServe. We also had some new finds this year. I'm skipping down in the report a little bit. iNaturalist, a fellow on iNaturalist found a species called Selageria doniana. It's a very tiny rock-dwelling moss, and he posted it on iNat and put enough microscopic shots that I was able to confirm his identification. So that was cool. I don't think we have a documented specimen anywhere. That would be nice to have. Maybe that'll be our field trip for next year. Who knows? And then we also picked up a species of bryum. Some people call it gemmabrium these days, gemmabrium dichotomum, during a survey. That one had been noted for Vermont before, but there weren't any records anywhere that I could find. So that's sort of new. And then finally, and most excitingly, during our summer field trip, which was wonderful, we found a species of Timia that had been found recently by Matt Peters in New Hampshire. We found it up at Mount Hoare, on the cliffs at Mount Hoare. This plant had been found there before, but had been misidentified quite a while back. I'm not sure exactly how long ago. But because we had a suspicion it might be there, based on Matt's find of the same one in New Hampshire, we looked more carefully at it, and it turned out to be Timia comata or comata, way out of range. It's a more northern species, but we documented that there, so that was cool. During that field trip, we found 7 S1 and 3 S2 moss species. That's very rich site, very important site, those cliffs on Mount Hoare for rare bryophytes and also vascular plants. Let's see. We also worked with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and this is something that I hope will be ongoing because we haven't really accomplished anything yet, except for discussions and semi-plans to do that, this and that. Hopefully that will realize itself in exposing more people to Vermont bryophytes. So we'll be working on, I hope we'll be working that this year. And finally, we looked at the species of greatest conservation need in the version of the State Wildlife Action Plan. And our only suggestion thus far has been to add the species that have been found new to the state and that were not yet in that list. I'm ready for questions.
Thanks, Dorothy. Appreciate it. Questions for Dorothy? Maybe I'll ask one. I don't really know the conservation status of those cliffs on Mount 4. Are they protected?
Yeah. So, what's that?
Somebody going to answer that for me? They're part of Willoughby State Forest,
So that's just kind of
I
how it
guess.
works, right?
They're
But I do
Yeah,
know-
they're entirely state-owned lands at this point, and they're certainly very well known as a botanical hotspot, both bryologically and in terms of vascular plants as well. So I mean, they're certainly well identified in the heritage database and I think in the management planning for the Willoughby State Forest lands as well, though maybe others can speak more specifically to that.
If you think of any question, just shoot me a text. I'll also try to
Even
respond
if
as well.
they
That's
weren't
okay.
protected,
You're gonna kill a project, don't worry.
this old lady had a challenge getting to them, and it
I'm
was lucky
sure you're
she
gonna get
was
the job, dude, like,
accompanied by
I am
two young
very
guys.
confident, like, this is fantastic.
Younger anyway. They're not on. There's a trail part way to them, but not all the way to them, and so the rest of the way you're bushwhacking on a very steep slope. The only potential danger to them is further landslides, I would say. It appears to be a pretty active site. There are dead trees and stuff at the base that have fallen off from up above. And
Awesome. Other questions for Dorothy?
Hey, Ellen, I'm wondering, and if Dorothy's okay with this, I wonder if we could advance Grace's membership even without her CV, given that she's the state botanist and reasonably well known to this group. Not to short circuit any procedural things, but what do you all think of that?
Oh, that's good, man.
We look to Hannah.
I'm not sure about the process, but I can look into it. I think you have discretion.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I can make sure that
Yeah.
there won't be a public process issue.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, we have, I think we have legal confirmation that we can move forward.
Excellent.
Casual legal.
Dorothy, do you want to make a motion?
my only hesitation is that I've asked her for her CV several times, and I would kind of like to make sure she still wants to be a member, although the chances that she doesn't are not very great, given that she's participated in every meeting that she's been able to. So I guess I'll make that motion, and then she can always resign if she decides she really doesn't want to.
As her if I can add, as her supervisor, she wants to. And my concern is always the will is stronger than the capacity. But I also, I'm not speaking against it. I'm just adding, I'm sure she wants to and will as much as she can.
And she would be a valuable member because she has a strong interest
Absolutely.
in bioethics and a very good eye in the field. So
Yeah. And also she's very eager to learn and probably could learn a lot from you, Dorothy. So.
Well, I would
maybe
be
a little bit from Matt.
I would be honored to second the nomination.
All right.
And
I
she'd
was
be
just-
very happy that she doesn't have to upgrade her resume.
Well, I mean, I was gonna, say to some degree, and maybe the SAG chairs would disagree with this, but it's it's a little bit of a challenge by choice in terms of participation in the SAG. So I think everyone does the best they can in terms of making sure they're coming to meetings and helping out with activities. But we always know people have busy lives. So yeah. So any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All right.
Of course, this is to, I would just say that this is to forward to the secretary, right? It's not our decision ultimately.
I think for the SAGs, it is our decision. I think this, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Eva.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So all those in favor of accepting
So for
Grace Flynn as new member of the Bryan White SAG, signify by saying aye.
I
Aye.
People have ever
Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. You have a new member, Dorothy.
Great. We can always use more if you know of people who'd like to participate.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Any other questions for Dorothy?
maybe you can
All
task,
right.
right? Maybe you can
Oh,
task
yeah.
Grace with finding some hornworts.
Say again?
Maybe you can task Grace with finding hornworts.
Hornworts aren't that hard to find.
Okay,
I'll take you on a field trip, Brian.
anytime.
Okay.
They're hard for me.
I will say, you do have the ability to nominate and appoint a member of any advisory group during any meeting. So
Okay.
we're above board here.
All right. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Okay. So let's see. Savannah, are you prepared to go a few minutes early?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, I apologize for the internet quality. I also have some kid logistics today, so I could not be in person, regrettably. Yeah, so as a summary, our fungal scientific advisory group had 3 full group meetings this year, 2 forays in addition to those meetings. Our leadership team, which is myself, Rick Vanderpool, Dave Muska, and Jess Rubin, we met separately from the larger group about 9 times this year. We meet in these smaller leadership team meetings to come up with projects and trying to realign ourselves with the goals that we set forth for us, and then bring those projects to the larger group so that we can work on them together. So we had no listings or no taking permits. And then for a summary of the larger goals that we've done for a baseline inventory update, we worked with Kent and Jason at VCE on the Vermont Fungi Atlas. So if you click on that link, it'll probably be easier internet-wise. This will bring you to a checklist of species. So this is really fun and exciting. We have over 54,000 records in Vermont, comprising about 3,800 species. So you can type in any fungi you can think of. If you have the capacity to do like birch polypore or something, is easy to spell on the fly. That will bring you to a species specific page, or like a species profile. It will talk about its taxonomy, its description, its range and ecology. It'll also give you information about the phenology of it, the history on INAT, and kind of direct you to more resources. So that's been the most exciting update that we have. Obviously, we think we have more than 3,800 species in Vermont. This is disproportionately looking at edible fungi and our larger macro fungi, because that's what people or like citizen science data tends to skew towards. The next larger goal we had was the assessment and review of existing species. So we're working with Fish and Wildlife to propose 34 watch list species for the 2025 swap. Of those, I think 14 are regional Northeast rare species. And then the others have strong mycorrhizal associations with like our ash, our hemlock, our beech trees, which are under threat from beech leaf disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, emerald ash borer. We did observe Squamanita and beechii in Marlborough this year, so that's really exciting because that's actually the first and only known record in Vermont, and it is part of this designated Northeast Rare 20. For conservation and outreach, we did 2 forays. We're trying to go out and survey kind of more rare habitats. So we looked at Gifford Woods and then sections of the Woodbury Mountain Wilderness Preserve. And we uploaded species lists to INAT of every time we go, if we have any species of interest that we see at that time. Also in this report will be several presentations and papers related to some of our members' works, which we don't need to go into in great detail, but I just wanted to include because the people in our group are really passionate and we're excited to share these with a larger group. And then lastly, we have an ask to include 4 new people in our SAG. So you have the CVs for Samantha Beach, Charlotte Pedersen, Carolyn Douglas, and Annabelle Langlis. And I can briefly chat about those if you wanted. Or if you want to take questions first.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe let's hold there for a sec, and any questions or things you want to bring up with Savannah on the report or the work the Fungal SAG has been doing. One question I was going to ask Savannah, in terms of the 20 rare species in the Northeast. Are the other 6 found in Vermont?
So we don't think they would be found in Vermont, but I guess we don't know for 100% certainty. They have more of a southern region in their historic natural range that we can find in literature. So if they were to exist, we would really be on an exaggerated cusp of their northern range.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And I guess I was going to ask about the state wildlife action plan. Have we had fungi in there before?
No, this will be the first time.
Yeah. How's that work going?
It's going great. I'm hoping to get John Cart our updated write-up by the end of this week, early next week. But we're really happy to be included. Everything will be put in as a watch list species. We're not designating anything as rare, threatened, or endangered, just because of the lack of information that we're trying to accumulate. But maybe by the 3035, we'll be able to start actually listing species in there.
Cool. And I guess the other thing I was going to just mention, if I'm not mistaken, the work that you were doing with VCE, did you end up getting a grant from FEMC to do some of that work?
Yeah. So all of the funding for this project came from FEMC.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, just awesome to see your team take the initiative there. So thank you for that.
Kind of a side question, but I'm curious, not knowing almost nothing about mycorrhiza myself, if there is any active research going on in terms of figuring out potential climate change impacts through droughts and precipitation cycles and more extremes. Is that a active body of research? Do we know anything?
We know that some so fungi can produce different spores. Some of them we call their like tougher overwintering spores, but similar to a seed bank in trees, they could last several years. So there is some research going on. I don't think it's broad enough right now for us to be able to make any strong stakes or claims. But we definitely see a decrease in populations and diversity when we have periods of drought. I just don't know how long it would take for a drought impact to maybe 10 or 5 or 10 years out, like if we would still see that species decrease or if there would be enough in the atmosphere to bring it back, like in the soil bank.
Thanks.
And I should mention too, one of the things, being a volunteer group primarily is hard to really answer all of these questions that we have, but the 4 people that were submitting to be included are actually in the Vermont Mycological Society, which was just created earlier this year. And we're hoping to work with them in order to set up these long-term monitoring plots, maybe in some of our more rare habitats, so that like every month we could go back and survey a certain area and try to see the difference over time, like a long period of time on what species diversity and abundance looks like.
That's great.
Keep WMAs in mind for that.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at the resumes or CVs that are up on our in our SharePoint site, but yeah, if you want to just give a quick overview of these folks, Savannah, that'd be great, and we can go ahead and vote.
Yeah, and Jim Andrews had his hand up. Do we have time to take that quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's a really valuable contribution that you guys have made in a relatively short period of time. And it's impressive, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. So
Thanks, Jim.
the first person that you have listed is Samantha Beach. This is actually the founder of the Vermont Mycological Society. And I had to laugh when I got her CV because everybody who I am presenting today calls themselves an amateur mycologist. But running a nonprofit solely focused on the identification and outreach of fungi, I don't think puts you on an amateur status. Charlotte Peterson, also a mycologist and part of the Vermont Mycological Society. She focuses more on agroforestry and agricultural mycorrhizae, which I think we're missing from our group. Carolyn Douglas, she's mycologist and a mycology educator primarily, also a member of the Vermont Mycological Society. And then lastly, Annabelle Langus, who I'm most excited to have on our group. She's part of the Mycological Society in Quebec as well as Vermont. So she lives up in the Northeast Kingdom and is constantly just back and forth with family across the border. So some of the habitats that we might not have access to in the Northeast Kingdom, we should have the same species represented in like the southeastern parts of Quebec. So I think that's a really great person and knowledge to have on board as well.
Nice. Any comments or questions about potential new members of the fungal SAG? All right. I guess I would recommend we just take them as a group. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve 4 new members of the fungal SAG?
I'll make
Sure,
that motion.
I'll second.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Was that
That was
Ally
Ally seconding.
Okay. Excellent. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passes. Excellent. Well, thanks for that, Savannah. Appreciate the work you and your committee are doing. This is great.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had intended to, but I had noticed earlier the bullet point about discussing ESC terms that we skipped over. I don't know if you want to slip that in somewhere.
I was right there, and then we let the secretary slip away. I don't know.
Yes.
So yeah, sorry about that. So this is something I have not really kept very good track of. I should have looked at my term as well when you brought this up. But Matt and Brian, I think you said your terms expire in February of 2025.
That's right.
And hard to know if we have other members who are sitting here with expired terms. I don't really know. Is this typically, I mean, is Fish and Wildlife involved in this at all, or does this go through the secretary's office in terms of kind of checking on reappointments?
Not sure what we've done in the past, but we could certainly work with you and touch base with the secretary's office. And figure out the status of everybody's term and what you want to do moving forward.
Yeah.
I think, Roz, we renewed me a few months ago, and that was, we just exchanged a few emails, and then I received the new appointment in the mail.
Yeah, and I think that goes through the secretary on our end.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thanks
How
for that
was that-
reminder. Forgot about that.
How was that initiated, Carla? Did you bring it up or being aware of it? I was clueless until Brian brought it to my attention that my term was expiring.
Gosh, I can't remember who initiated the email chain. I want to point to you, but I'm not sure.
Probably not.
Oh, okay.
I'm not tracking that.
There is a list on the governor's website. So Matt Peters, February 28th, 2025. Brian, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, February 29th, 2025. We have Alexandra and Alan up in 2026.
Yeah, I popped the link in the chat too for folks.
Yep.
Oh, thanks, Allie. So then Carla and Paul, sometime into the future.
2027.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and this is linked to on the ESC webpage.
Yeah.
There's a link to this. So yeah, forgot about that. Thanks. There we go.
Okay. Well, if there's anything that I can help with, I just assume everyone has a life appointment. So
I guess it does have to go to the governor's office. I don't know if the renewals do, but I think this from A&R to the governor's office.
Yeah.
It would seem like this would be an annual occurrence given the staggering of the terms. So it's strange that we don't seem to have institutional knowledge around this.
Well, you can blame your chair for that.
No, not looking to blame anyone. Or just.
Well, I don't remember
Roz,
how
have you
long
dealt
we
with
had
this in the
Liz.
past?
Apparently I did with Carla, but I wasn't tracking it.
Oh yeah.
They just
Yeah.
executed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just wouldn't let Liz Thompson go for years.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, my vague recollection of that around Liz was that there is some sort of, you're sort of in it until you're kicked out or replaced. But I don't know if that's quite official.
Yeah, that was kind of the story. Is we did not have a replacement on the committee, and so we just kept her chained to the conference table. Okay. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Matt. Sorry I skipped over that. And like I said, if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. So yeah.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Jim, you ready to go? 20 minutes early? This is
Sure.
like amazing. I'm stunned here.
I'm willing to take up.
You've got like an hour, Jim.
I can
Don't
take it
tell
up
Matt.
if you want.
I know.
Are you putting it up there?
I'll pull it up. Yep.
Okay. Well, we met twice. We had regular meetings twice this year. We also met with Luke Groff and had a couple swap meetings. And we had a field trip with some of the Fish and Wildlife people, also U.S. Fish and Wildlife people, to try to relocate a North American racer for the first time in 10 years. And it was quite exciting that we actually did find a racer. I mean, it was a single snake, but still evidence that that population down in Guilford and Vernon is still extant. Bill Kilpatrick resigned from our SAG. That's our one change in membership. Bill had been a member for a long time, and Bill was well recognized with the Sally Laughlin Award a couple years back.
Yep.
But we're sad to see Bill go. We don't have any new listings. We did recommend that we take a close look at Eastern ribbon snake, and we put together a document, and we've done that once before, and we decided that no, we really didn't have what we needed to recommend that species for listing once again, though we would certainly like to gather more data. And of course, we said we felt a formal study assessing the status of the ribbon snake in Vermont was warranted, but of course, that all depends on people and time and money and interest, and whether or not that can happen or will happen. Maybe we'll find a graduate student.
Jim, what are the threats to ribbon snake populations?
Well, it's very scattered, and it likes kind of open wetland habitat, and in some cases there's agricultural use around those lowland open wetlands, and agricultural use in machinery, cutting, raking, baling, those are all threats. Beyond that, we haven't seen snake fungal disease turn up in that species a lot, but I think mainly we would fall back on the standards, which would be habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation for that one. But no others that I would really pick out.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. We had a couple permit requests. Carla brought us some information on a possible solar development in Fairhaven that we may discuss later, Alan. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we got clarification. We haven't really finalized this with Hannah, but I think we may go into executive session because we'll probably be dealing with a location confidential issue.
Okay, so this was a site that it could be a potentially large solar development and had some impacts on some listed snakes. We had a power line project that presented some risks to Fowler's toad, and we were asked to review a Fowler's toad survey protocol, which we did. And then again, we were asked about lampricides and lampricide treatment, and we regularly recommend against the use of lampricides, our primary concern being the ability of mud puppy to sustain populations over the long term. We don't have any current or pending recommendations for a critical habitat. We did spend a fair amount of time looking at our risk matrix that we've put together, and we decided to try to clarify some of the confusion about what we have recommended and haven't recommended and the changes that we've made. We actually went back and forth on the leopard frog, but we have not recommended the leopard frog for special concern status. We did initially, and then we backed off on that one. Let's see, the map turtle really didn't seem to need special concern status. It is limited to really Lake Champlain and the mouths of the larger rivers coming into Lake Champlain, but it can be quite abundant, and we don't see really large threats currently that would justify having that special concern status. So we dropped that. We also dropped that for the blue-spotted salamander, which seems fairly secure in the lowlands and the Champlain basins and the edges of our big marshes. So we dropped that one as well. We have, we've played around with that risk matrix quite a bit, and we're certainly willing to share that with other SAGs and the ESC if they're interested in seeing it. We made some changes. Did I skip over one there? Let's see. Oh yeah, that we did add mink frog. There are really two species of frog that we have that are northern frogs at the southern extreme of their range. One is mink frog, and one is boreal chorus frog. And mink frog has gelatinous egg masses, rounded masses, and rounded masses are adapted to cold water in order to get enough dissolved oxygen to get the dissolved oxygen to the center of the mass. Otherwise, if you're going to lay your egg masses late, then you should have a film on the water which better exposes you to dissolved oxygen and the lower dissolved oxygen in warmer water. So with warmer waters and the warming of lakes and breeding habitat, we're concerned about mink frog being able to maintain its populations over the long term. And so we decided to give that should have a special concern species in it. And it does show up as now historic, 25 years since we've had reports of that species from a variety of towns. Now that could well be, we just haven't made the effort that we should, but we're still concerned about that species. And the other northern species at the southern extreme of its range is the boreal chorus frog, which really does appear to have entirely disappeared. Now, whether that was climate change related, we don't know. Whether that had to do with agricultural practices that have changed, we don't know. It's a short-lived species. Whether it had to do with a few years of drought, it could have. So we would, we wish we knew why that species disappeared, but it hasn't been seen since or heard since 1999. So we're also working with the SWAP team, made a variety of recommended changes in species of greatest conservation need. Could you go back up a little bit for me? Yeah, it's good. So we thought that common water snake, Decay's brown snake, and blue spotted salamander should be changed from medium to low priority SGCN. Jefferson salamander changed from high to medium. And mink frog should be moved from a low priority to a medium priority SDCN. We also made a lot of recommendations on the heritage ranks. But as we understand it, we're not really in a position as a SAG to just make those changes on our own. So we have made a series of recommendations to the heritage program and backed them up with some data. And so those are in need of review. Those are just recommendations right now, but I think they're all valid. I think they're all changes that we really should make. Skipping on down.
Jim?
Yeah.
Jim, could you explain the reasoning behind the decision for Jefferson to go to medium?
Well, we've discovered we've gotten a lot more records and we're aware of a lot more sites for that species than we used to. So quite a few more than what would normally be considered for something that was a high priority. It does have indeed other threats in that it is the most sensitive to acidity, pH. But it's generally found in areas that have good acid buffering capacity. And we haven't seen that really change. Although we're certainly still getting acidity, we haven't seen any populations disappear as a result. I could give you more information on that. There was another sheet. There's another data sheet that I sent along to Alan that we also put up on our website that you can look at that tries to justify that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I think it's on the SharePoint as well in this same folder.
Yep. So let's skip down to the lampricides. There was a new paper that we became aware of by Ryan Wagner, who was looking at population viability analysis of mud puppies. And it was really suggesting that, well, let's see, may impact populations if both adults and juveniles are impacted at greater than 5% of the population and at intervals shorter than or equal to 5 years. And so given that our current interval between lampricide treatments is 4 years, we thought that we were justified in recommending that the treatment regularity be extended by a couple years to give them a better chance of recovering. Skipping on down, Alan. You want to? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to interpret the impacted at greater than 5% of the population. I'll take a look at that paper and can pass it out to the committee.
We still have this concern about pond sliders, and I know that there was work done last year to try to limit or to kind of create the foundation for controlling the sale of pond sliders. It's the most popular pet turtle, and they frequently get released and survive, and they have become invasive in most of the northeastern, well, eastern states. It's a southeastern species, and with climate change, we're concerned about that. And I quote Roz down in the bottom there. Roz says this may be acted upon this coming session. I don't know, Roz, if you want to say anything there.
Well, we introduced a bill last year that included this issue, and it wasn't taken up. So it's just our hope that it may be taken up this year, but we just don't know yet. I don't think anything's been introduced yet. So,
So
too early to say.
Whose hands is that really in?
The
Who-
commissioners right now, really.
Commissioner?
Okay. The second one was on herp protection, and that was just to try to provide some protection for non-listed herps so that they couldn't be all species. If they're not listed and you have a hunting license, then apparently you can collect them and fish with them and eat them, etc. And the idea was to address that and limit that to a handful of species that could be legally caught, hunted, eaten. And we'd like to see progress made on that as well and provide protection to help keep some of our more common species common.
That was also in that same bill.
They were
Deanna,
together
you
in the
wanna
same bill.
Speak to the status of that.
Yeah, I believe that the commissioner it is the same language. It creates very explicit statutory authority over the regulation and protection of herps, including additional information in our, the transportation and importation statute that would prohibit the movement or possession of herps without a permit, similar to some of our other permit authorizations. That proposed language, which is the same as the language that we attempted to introduce last year, the commissioners reached out at this point to at least one sponsor in the Senate. So I think we're really hoping that we can get that introduced soon.
Glad to hear it, and thank you for doing that. I think we can go down through this. These are new records that have come in, and we've gotten new records for everything except for the boreal chorus frog. Fowler's toad, it's been a few years since anybody has reported that species. We did mention that the North American racer we got a record of this year, and Luke has plans, Luke Groff, state herpetologist, has plans to put out some cameras on some of the artificial dens we've created this coming year, and hopefully that will get us some additional data. And we'll also take another group field trip to see if we can find some North American racers. We always have some unusual things that show up, red-footed tortoise, pets that show up. Most of them are not going to survive a winter here in Vermont, but things like the pond slider might, and that's why that one's of more concern to us. You can move down through this fairly quickly, Alan. Let's see. Finding a ribbon snake in South Hero was pretty exciting. Not that, I shouldn't say we found it, but it was a report that came in through the Atlas through a student at UVM. And we have not had a ribbon snake report from Grand Isle since 1934. So this was really cool that somebody had found this population up there in South Hero. Luke had a bunch of people working with him, plus at UVM, looking for spotted turtles, putting out camera traps, doing eDNA studies, but they didn't find any new populations. Timber rattlesnakes numbers appeared to be up in their studies. Mark Ferguson, his mud puppy work, which was to transport mud puppies above the level in the Lamoille River where that was treated, so to get them up above the falls, upstream of Arrowhead Mountain Dam. And he's moved an impressive amount of mud puppies, 134 animals. And he will trap again this spring to see if he can catch any of the transported mud puppies. Some of those are radio tagged. We created some wood turtle nesting mounds at some new sites. We haven't done that before. One is a state site, one is private land. And hopefully by bringing the nesting mounds closer to the rivers, the turtles won't have to cross the roads in those sites that they had been crossing to get to good nesting habitat. One One thing that's just kind of discouraging is that we have created some turtle underpasses with VTrans and with Steve Perrin, with the railroad folks in places where it was valuable to get turtles under the rails. And although those were created, the maintenance people don't seem to realize what they are or what they were created for, and they've just been filled in.
You're kidding me.
No. So even though a fair amount of effort has been done to create those underpasses, they got filled in with gravel. And so there has to be some better communication between the railroad ecologists and the railroad, if there are such things, and the railroad maintenance people. That's it, I think, Alan.
Hey, oh, I'm sorry, Alan.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jim.
Jim, I just wanted to follow up on your last comment regarding the filling into some of that infrastructure for moving turtles under the road and railroad beds. Have you communicated that with Chris Slasar or anybody in VTrans? Are they
Chris
aware
knows
of it?
about it. Yeah, Chris knows about it.
Okay. Whenever we have the next VTrans Fish and Wildlife Steering Committee meeting, we'll bring that up with them, if not before.
That would be great. That could be very helpful.
Okay. Is there any signage at those underpasses?
There's markings. No, I don't think there's a stand-up sign that explains what's going on, but the ties are marked, especially marked with different colors, but that didn't do it.
Okay.
Can they be unfilled in or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they can be unfilled, but I think there's just some regular maintenance routine that maintenance folks do that fills them in.
To follow up on about the spotted turtles work Luke is doing, don't give up yet, because the eDNA work, they really just did my understanding is they just did sort of a trial run with known sites and absent sites to test out for proof of concept. So hopefully in the coming year or two, they'll be getting tests from other unknown but potential sites, and then we'll see if anything new comes up.
I think it was successful in the known sites,
Yes.
but not every location.
6 out of 7 between Vermont, New York. Was it more than Vermont and New York?
But I mean, at a given site, not every sample was positive for spotted turtle.
Oh, okay.
So, so there's some spatial variation, I think.
Yeah, I think they learned a bit about where to take it closer to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would be great if we could get that technique working for us.
Yeah. Any other questions for Jim?
Yeah.
All right.
I got 40 minutes, I think.
Yeah. Nice. All right.
Alan, can I go ahead? I had a question. I was.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, Jim, if you could. I noticed you had suggested wood turtle ranking going from S3 up to S or down to S2. I don't know if that's up or down. Can you speak to what's behind that? I'm sorry, I haven't been able to get into the ESC drive to access any additional materials you provided about that. Are we seeing less of them, or is it just
no? It's
concerns?
not really that it's not that we're seeing less of them, which is interesting. I mean, if we looked at wood turtle a number of years ago in terms of state listing, and we happen to be, I guess you would call us one of the responsibility states.
Mm-hmm.
We have good habitat for wood turtle, and so we do get a fair amount of records of wood turtle. The issue being is that Well, the threat from equipment, because a lot of those streams, the sections of streams where they're just coming out of the mountains, are alongside agricultural land. And so there's agricultural mortality from all of those processes. There's a really high egg mortality just in terms of egg predation on that species. It's a long-lived species, and so in order for it to survive over the long term, you need the adult females to survive a good long life. There's also concerns with road crossings. So it's really high on the threats. It's not that it's low on numbers of records that are coming in. It's just higher on the threats that are coming in, and its life cycle.
So your recommendation for the rank change is really just sort of just a clearer acknowledgement of the breadth of those threats in the larger context.
Yes, it is.
Thanks.
And go ahead.
Yeah, it's a species that comes up with some regularity and ecological assessment sites that I work on, so, and town inventories and so forth. So nice to have the perspective.
Yeah.
Other questions for Jim? This document, which does no good to you, Matt, is in the it's in the ESC SharePoint. So in addition to the annual report, the recommended S rank changes.
Someday when I can get back in, I'll review these things.
You know, I should have mentioned it, and I didn't mention that this is a species that is illegally collected and sold. I should have thrown that in there, that if we're too transparent about where there are good populations of this species, then there are collectors who want to get in there and collect them and sell them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to say let's take a quick break here. I don't know. Is Jed on? I think he is.
Yes,
Jed,
I'm here,
Jed,
Alan.
you are.
Happy to
Okay.
happy to
Okay.
take a break. I'll be here when we get back. Yes.
Okay, we'll probably be a couple minutes early. So, but maybe 11:10 or something like that, as I continue to squander minutes as we get through the agenda.
Oh, you're
All right.
charging through it, Alan.
Yeah. Okay. Back in I don't know, 8. We'll go for 8 after 11. We'll go for a precision 10-minute break.
Sounds good.
Please dive into the refreshments. I don't want to bring all of those things home. One way or another, I won't. They'll get consumed by the masses here.
Yeah. You guys need grad students.
Go ahead. I think we were cut off midstream there.
No, it's just the mammal team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
have
think
to say, I'm
go
really
ahead, Matt.
disappointed to hear you didn't have swarms of rogue biologists beating down your door to comment on this.
Yeah, there's a lot
Not
of
yet.
people interested. Like
Bryologist.
we're interested in bringing in more, but we also, historically have been a smaller group, and I think the dynamic has worked pretty well. But yeah, we're always looking for others. So we're working through that now. Like I said, we brought 2 on last year. We got another one coming in. It would be great to get another 2 to 3 additional people. So working on it.
Okay. Any questions for Jen? Comments? Okay. Pass it to Kent.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Well, I'd like to have Jed rest assured that he was probably not the last person to get his report in, because I turned mine in at 4 p.m. last night. But it is in the folder, so you can access it now if you want to.
That's your map.
But I'm just going to go through a few quick things on it, some highlights for the invert group. So we have 14 members in 2024, but we lost 2 members at the end of the year. Declan resigned, and Michelle Graziosi, she took a new position away from DEC, and she was a really active member with aquatics with our group, and it's going to be a bit of a loss for us. And so I just wanted to, publicly thank her here for a bunch of years of service on ISAG and really hard work on a bunch of aquatic organisms for us. So that's going to be a big loss for us. And like all the other groups have said, we're always looking for new members, especially because we have so many species under our purview. I like to quickly go through the box score for us. There's 18 species listed in Vermont that are inverts, 1 amphipod, 10 mussels, freshwater mussels, 3 tiger beetles, and 4 bumblebees. And 3 of those are listed federally, a tiger beetle, the dwarf wedge mussel, and the rusty patch bumblebee. And we already talked about upcoming, potentially, the monarch. And we think there's probably like 21,000 inverts to deal with for our group. So I'm not going to go through each one here.
Just keep it quick.
No, the big one is under listing actions. We spent the last year, 2024, working on a listing action and review for elk toe, a freshwater mussel, that we actually handed in yesterday at 3:50 to Alan right before this report. And so we actually did the review and we're done, and we moved it on to the Endangered Species Committee for this freshwater mussel. We've talked about it a little bit before, so I assume it's probably going to come up in your next meeting or sooner. But we are recommending that this species be potentially listed as endangered in Vermont. It's declining many places throughout its range across North America. It's an S1 species in Vermont and Quebec, and it's only known from a 5-mile stretch of the Lamoille River. And so that report is in Alan's hands right now, and we look forward to discussing it more if needed with the Endangered Species Committee and talking about it, and having some of the mussel folks in our group come in and talk about it if needed. So that was a big chunk of our work last year, was really getting that ongoing reports and studies. We're working on 3 status reports for 3 lady beetles, which will probably be done with in this quarter, and then decide whether that we're moving them on to be listed be considered for listing. We're working on a couple critical habitat designation reports, one for brook floater, and then one that we're getting close to maybe being done, which is the Taconic cave amphipod. And we have
My favorite amphipod.
What's that?
Sorry. I said it's my favorite amphipod.
Your favorite amphipod. All right. It's mine too, because it's maybe
The only one you're aware of.
Exactly. Me too.
But I love that I can trot it out from time to time.
Right? Fun fact, it may be one of the few or only organisms that survived the glaciation in Vermont underground. So it probably survived glaciation here. Anyhow, and we have a couple recovery plans we're working on, and we have continued to work on for tiger beetles, and keep talking about a overall recovery plan for freshwater mussels that it's been in draft for a while. So we've been working on that for a while, and I don't know, maybe I'm going to needle the group to try to get some of that moving faster. Some of the big stuff we really did in 2024 was we helped a lot with natural heritage with S rankings for a lot of groups. And that in turn helped set us up for doing a lot of work with the Wildlife Action Plan. And so we had a lot of subgroups break out and work all year long with Mark Ferguson and others on trying to figure out what groups or species might be removed as species of greatest conservation need and what might be added. And really what's exciting for me is that not that we added a lot, but we did add a lot, but we were able to add a lot because we have so much more information over the last decade. We've really garnered a lot more information on invertebrates in Vermont, and that's pretty exciting. So we were able to add, I don't know how many we're actually adding, but we have 261 species that are going to be species of greatest conservation need, which sounds like a lot, but out of 21,000 species, it's not that many. But the big groups we've added we added 43 bee species. No, scratch that because there was already some bumblebees on there. We added about 38 bee species because we have so much good bee data. We added a bunch of lady beetles. We got better information on butterflies. We never had anything on snails, and we have had better information on terrestrial snails and aquatic snails. We had a lot better information on moths, and we added 3 grasshoppers, and we could really dig into the macroinvertebrates, mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. So we were able to really dig deeper in and have some supporting data on what we're doing with species of greatest conservation need. And it was a lot of work, but I feel like we did a really good job on that. We also added 21 species to the watch list for the State Wildlife Action Plan. And most of those species are species that rely on plants, mostly trees, that are maybe in big trouble due to introduced diseases or organisms. And so we looked to see what all the invertebrates were that might use these trees and other plant species that could be in trouble in the near future. So that was I won't say it was fun, but it was rewarding work to do with Mark and others on the swap, and we hope to continue working on that. The other thing we're working on. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question here. I'm kind of curious. So, 261 species, it's a lot. And, kind of thinking if you were to, write a or a few SWIG grants, I mean, how would you sort of think about prioritizing invertebrate work that needs to happen?
I'm sorry, you broke up. I can't answer that. No, I'm just kidding. That's a big question. That's actually what we're actually going to work on next, I think, with Mark and John. Some of us have volunteered to start grouping together some of these into some of the habitats and natural communities that they're using, and then trying to figure out exactly what some of the problems are that may run across many of these groups. Whether it's climate change or pesticides or land use, or starting to try to see where the thread runs across a lot of these different groups and maybe some of the 261 species here. And then once we do that, then we can start to think bigger and think about like big grants like that or big experimental work or something like that. So I'm dodging your question, Alan, because I don't really know yet, but I think we're on the road to that. And that the swap is sort of igniting that under us to get under our rear ends to get that done and figure out the answer to that question.
Cool,
one thing I will say though is that I think a lot of species have the potential, especially a lot of the pollinators, have the potential to be missed by some of the 30 by 30 stuff, because a lot of them might not be forest specialists, and that tends to be more forest oriented. So when we think about land trusts that are working with farms and things, I start thinking about a lot of these pollinators and stuff. So yeah, there might be something there. So I didn't really answer your question very well, but I think that's okay. That's something that I think we're really trying to get into and out of our next analysis with John and Mark for the State Wildlife Action Plan. Mm-hmm. The other thing is there's 21 species have recently been designated as G3 species in the world, and they don't have a Vermont rank. And so these species we're now going to review in 2025 to see if we have enough occurrence data or enough information about them in Vermont to find out like why are they not ranked here, and what can we do about that here in Vermont. So it's sort of a little action list for us to work on. Monarch, we already kind of talked about monarch. I'm going to skip over that. And then just a few highlights of some of the stuff that some of the other members are doing. One of the things that really helped us especially with the species of greatest conservation need, and then also going into the future looking at stuff, is we worked with Michelle at the biomonitoring and aquatic studies section, and we took 42 years of their aquatics data that they have in a database, and we made it into a sampling event data set for to be able to put into the Ross Life and GBIF as sampling events. And it's over 500,000 records now of aquatic invertebrates that we now have at our fingertips to be able to look at, see where things are, what's going on, and then be able to easily update it every year at the end of field season when they're done with their lab work, to be able to keep it updated every year so that all of us have it right at our fingertips to be able to use it in all kinds of manners. So that was a big deal to get done. And a joint project between the department and VC and many others is a second Vermont Butterfly Atlas. We had our second season of the 5-year atlas, and we're already well on our way to getting so many more records than we did in the first atlas, because there's so many more butterfly watchers out there helping us. And I think we're probably I believe we're the only state or province in Canada that has started a second butterfly atlas to have actually, for the first time, to have a 20-year comparison of changes in the butterfly fauna for a region. So once again, Vermont, we're leading. All right. Sounds good. And we're seeing a lot of changes already. I haven't looked closely at the data but just looking at it pretty quickly, there's a lot of changes that have happened in 20 years with the butterfly fauna. So we're going to find out some really interesting stuff, both good and bad. So in a nutshell, that's what we've done in 2024, and we got a lot on our plate for 2025 that I hope we get through and accomplish.
Thanks, Ken. That's
Yep.
great.
I have a question about the elk toe mussel, and forgive me if I'm getting like too far ahead of the committee, but just knowing that I think there is lampricide use in that stretch of the river. I guess just curious what the committee's recommendations are around that. And if that's a future conversation, then that's fine. I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, so as Kent mentioned, I got this at 3:00 yesterday. So it now does reside in I think in listing proposals, a new folder that I made early this morning. So none of the committee has had a chance to look at this yet. And one of the things that we haven't done very well on the committee is kind of kept up our subcommittees. I think I used to be the chair of the listing committee. I can't remember. I feel like Paul might have been on that listing committee too, but generally what we've done in these situations is had a subcommittee look at the documentation first, provide some feedback to the SAG so that it's in good shape for the committee to actually review it. So, that would probably be the way that I would move this forward, is to say, Paul, if you're game, maybe this is Paul's hour that he's gone. Paul and I can take a look at this and maybe give some feedback to Invertebrate SAG if we think there's some questions that we know are going to come up from the ESC, and then it can come back to the committee for the full assessment in April.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Anything else for Kent? Okay.
Thank you.
You will. Yeah, thanks, Ken. Continue on. Looks like Mark.
Yes. Greetings, everyone. Sorry I did not make it, but it was like blizzard conditions right when I was heading out here. I guess we got it on the western side of the slopes, but you can bring that up, Al.
Yep.
I'll go through pretty quick here. The bird SAG birds met twice. Spring meeting and fall meeting. Our membership was unchanged. Al and I remain as chair and vice chair, with Margaret remaining as secretary. We didn't have any species listed, and no species were proposed for listing or downlisting. My Franklin County Airport is probably going to be modified with, I need to work with Roz on that. I too was late in the day and tried to glean this from our notes. So Roz has the most updated Franklin County work, which she spoke about earlier. We have been working with Jill and John as far as the Wildlife Action Plan. We met 2 times and have added 7 species to the species of greatest conservation need, which I think brings us to 73. And we have, most of the SAG is the advisory committee for birds for the Wildlife Action Plan. So we've divvied up those species for updates, for species accounts, things of that nature. And we'll be working on that in the coming months I think we're, like everyone else, waiting on the database to be pulled together so we can start doing that. I sent Al Kevin Talon's from the Vermont Center of Tolan. Sorry, I'm all over the place this morning. Kevin Tolan's report or recovery plan, rather, for Eastern Meadowlark, which has been looked at by the SAG, reviewed, and presented to the Endangered Species Committee for review. Al now has that in his new folder, I think. No, do you, or I guess it was the,
Go to 2025 recovery plans.
Okay.
And there is the document. So.
All right. And
yes.
We look forward
see the date was yesterday.
Yes. So I went back and forth with Kevin yesterday. And so we look forward to hearing back from the Endangered Species Committee on our recommendation to accept this plan. And VCE is also working to complete the whippoorwill recovery plan. And we hope to see that maybe as soon as the spring meeting for SAG for us to review. As far as species, endangered and threatened species, and recently recovered species, pretty good years all around. Loons had a pretty good year, one of their best years, with 123 nesting pairs. And that should read up from 108 last year. So loons are doing extremely well. There were, I believe, more than 350 loons seen during the Loon Watch, which is held every year. And so, quite a successful recovery. Peregrine falcons and bald eagles are also holding their own. We have not been surveying all sites over the past 2 years. So the data is from a selection of sites that we were able to collect it on. Both species were down slightly as far as the number of young to come off. And there is some thought that, at least with peregrines, avian flu may be affecting nesting success for peregrines. Nothing definitive, but we'll continue to look in that. And same thing with bald eagles. And that should say 2024. And then the osprey population, yes.
So can you tell me more about thinking AI is influencing nest success for those 2 species? What have you seen?
That was something that Margaret mentioned at the SAG meeting. And to be honest, other than her comment, I have no additional details on that. I'm not sure if it's impacting the adults directly, and that's resulting in lower nest activity. But I can check with Margaret on that.
That'd be great.
And then sure. And then our osprey population continues to be stable from what John Gobel has reported to us. As far as the actual endangered and threatened species, start with common terns, my favorite. This year was a really weird year for us because normally we have been able to monitor our productivity or fledging success using banding. And I got up on the nesting islands this year, particularly Papasquash Island. And there were so many tern chicks, both Caspian and common terns. We had 40 pairs of Caspian terns nesting up on Papasquash. So common tern chicks, gull chicks. I started to try to ban some of the common tern chicks, and there were just too many. And we realized that because things were so tightly packed and there were so many chicks, we decided to limit our time on the island and also not return to the next couple of surveys we did. We didn't actually go into the colony for fear of just total mayhem and disruption of all those young birds. So it was, looking at Papasquash Island and all my time doing this, it was amazing to see what seemed to be a fully functional lake bird colony with tons of chicks, tons of adults. We guesstimated at least 200 fledglings, common tern fledglings. There could be more. They were just all over the island. And we used that number since we didn't have our actual banding chick number. And we saw very little evidence of predation after the terns, and gulls had fledged that suggested that there was any predation that was occurring on Papasquash Island. So at a minimum, we said 200 fledglings per pair, which gives us about 1 fledgling per pair, which is some of the highest that we've had. The adult population still over a 10-year average, it's above the 200 pair threshold for downlisting, but the adult numbers over the past 5 years have remained under 200 pairs. But over the past 4 years or so, we've seen large number of tern chicks, common tern chicks, come off the island, and so we're hoping that as they mature, which takes 2 to 3 years, that we'll begin to see more and more terns showing up on the tern islands. Rock Island had 0 success. Chicks were nailed by what we think great horned owls, black-crowned night herons, which are nesting over on Lazy Lady. We had 2 adult common tern chicks taken by, 2 adult terns taken by owls. We rarely see common terns getting predated by great horns, but this year we did document that. So that colony, unfortunately, was a total failure. But overall, the terns did great. One concern, now that we have a new tern on the island, it looks like they're expanding. There were 2 nests there last year, 40 this year. It looks like they're expanding into the gull nesting area and not into the common tern nesting areas, but we'll see how Caspian tern numbers change and impact specifically Papasquash Island in the coming years. As far as many of our other endangered species, we had no documented nesting of upland sandpipers. The Missisquoi staff at Missisquoi Wildlife Management Area, Refuge, documented 44 pairs of black terns in 2024, which is up from last year. Spruce grouse, there weren't surveys conducted, no data for rusty blackbird. Common nighthawk, no nesting documented, but they still pick up a whole bunch of nighthawks migrating along the Connecticut River during fall migration, so they're around. Sedge wren, Kevin reported 1.
Mark, I guess I just say they're around, just not in Vermont.
Yes,
they're around, but not as breeding birds. So
They're not as right.
They're-
They're not that we've been able to document. Right. Sedren, Kevin had one bird at Dead Creek, which was around all summer. We don't know if there was breeding there. Henslow sparrow, no observations. Loggerhead shrike, no observation. And I thought from the notes that we had, I thought it was Dead Creek that he had the Sedren.
No, Missisquoi, sorry.
It was Missisquoi? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a new location for them, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then grasshopper sparrows, and Roz can speak more to this as far as Franklin County Airport. We did have 3 singing males at Camp Johnson, which is lower than we've had in past decades. There are problems with some of the grass habitat being overtaken by knapweed and other forbs that may be limiting nesting there. And then we had, I think you said to me last year, and I don't know, 8 singing males were documented at Franklin County Airport.
Plus a pair.
And what's that?
So eight singing and a pair. I mean,
And
there
a
were
full
other
pair.
pairs, but that was the high count of the 4 visits.
Okay, which is somewhat lower than what we've seen in the past. I think we made it up to 13 individuals at one point.
Mark, so I think, well, I know that Alan did with John Buck did a complete site survey. A lot of the past counts were based on point counts, so they would definitely be lower because I'm doing full area searches.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yep.
I would expect, if all else was equal, that I would see more, than what was counted in point counts in the past. But then also at one point, 2014, you and John Buck did a full search and found like 14 singing.
Yeah.
When I first surveyed them in 2023, there were 18 singing. So now we're at essentially 9 potential pairs or actual pairs.
With a lot of questions still up in the air as far as mitigation concerns. It sounds like, as we heard earlier, that FAA is putting pressure on Franklin County Airport, and the state is working with them to continue the mitigation and management actions that we hope to see passed there. We also had a pair of eastern meadowlarks documented there. Whippoorwill, 24 routes were surveyed, and 77 of those sites had eastern whippoorwill. I don't know, there were no reported numbers with that, but they're still around. And then for that's a threatened species. Eastern meadowlark is threatened, so VCE did more surveys this year. Kevin had 95 adults at 40 sites, which is a slight decrease from levels. And the SAG is now in a position to start looking at both eastern meadowlark and potentially grasshopper sparrow. They've met the conditions for uplisting to endangered. So we will start those conversations in the spring and see if we want to move forward with the recommendation for that uplisting. I know the state likes to bunch some of these changes, and it sounds like there are a couple other out there, so maybe there'll be enough changes for the state to move forward with that on a fairly quick timeline. There was no review of species of special concern. And as you can see, if you want full meadow reports, you can contact these individuals. So all in all, many of the bird species did relatively well or are holding their own, both those species that have recovered and, we have seen some problems with grasshopper sparrow and eastern meadow lark. So we'll, start looking into that as we, at our next meeting, as well as continue to work with Jill on the wildlife action plan components.
Thanks, Mark. Questions for Mark?
Yeah, I think, Brian, you were up first.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was great. Just a quick question. You may have this, or maybe I should ask Eric, or maybe Roz knows. On the jump in loon nest numbers, I seem to remember some years ago when there were like 95 or 100 pairs, that Eric said, the limiting factor for more loon nesting success might not necessarily be available sites, but our ability to handle human impacts, getting enough loon volunteers to kind of patrol ponds and make sure that loons aren't getting harassed. And so I thought that may have limited more loon nesting success. I'm kind of wondering if that's an issue or why they keep going up, which is great.
Yeah, I think that if I remember from the report that Eric sent in, something 80 plus of those nesting sites were on nest platforms. So there has been, a really big effort to use those. And if I remember correctly, they had higher success. I think one other factor is, you have increased interactions between loons, which, territorial loons, nesting loons, intruders. And so that could be a factor in reproductive success. But yeah, numbers just seem to keep going up.
And they're expanding to new ponds, new lakes and ponds. Have they been?
That I couldn't answer for you. Okay. I didn't get that sense from Eric's report, but I can look at that again.
Well, yeah, we can find out. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, this isn't so much a question for you, Mark, but your comments about some listing actions prompted. I'm just wondering if we have any projection on when a TNA rule might be moving forward with a bundle of things. It'd be helpful to know what kind of timeline for I'm thinking of some potential listing and delistings from the Flora group.
It's every 10 years, isn't it? 2028.
There's no set interval.
No, I know.
Just when we feel like, I do feel like there's sort of a bunch swelling up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they also take a while to put together.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just thinking.
One of the things I wanted to just bookmark for us is just the idea of the automatic state listings with something like Monarch, and what does that mean for us? But maybe for next time.
Well,
and we'll know more next time. So,
but we can also touch on it at noon when Lyle comes to talk about sturgeon.
Great.
So.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, let me just say, Mark, I guess it would be, just helpful. Maybe I'll just ask if SAG chairs want to shoot me an email and let me know how many species you might kind of have in your back pocket, like either, sort of half done or significant conversations at SAG meetings to say that you've got some changes, uplifting new listings, delistings, that sort of thing. And we can kind of put together a little inventory, and then maybe it would be helpful to coordinate from there.
Sure.
One thing that in my flurry of talking that I missed is the Bird SAG also did meet with Carla Fenner concerning this, the Fairhaven Solar Project. And there was a lot of discussion, and the takings permit is now available, I guess, although I'm having trouble accessing it. I have to work that out with John. We looked at the site, and one of the areas, it's 120 acres with 100 acres covered in solar panels. And it actually encompasses a site that used to be in the Bobolink project and report 100 plus bobolinks. Those fields are now included in this proposal. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roz or Al. And, at first glance, this was quite shocking for us to potentially lose that many birds or habitat for that many birds. And so we've had some discussions which will follow up with the permit. Right now, solar developers can mitigate by putting money into the bobolink project, and many on the SAG did not feel that was going to really be sufficient to cover the loss of this habitat. And there was talk of some kind of, and I don't know whether it would pass or there recommendation would be made to have some upfront funding to actually do an acquisition of productive haylands for bobolink that might replace this. So that, that said, we'll be looking at that permit here, and maybe John's going to touch base on it this afternoon, and how it impacts grassland birds.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. We will come back to it this afternoon. We're still trying to kind of figure out how we want to address it. But yeah, and I guess I should say it is because of Eastern Meadowlark. It was in the bobolink project,
right,
but bobolink's not listed. So yeah.
Right.
Brian, go ahead.
Oops, sorry, I didn't lower my hand from last time.
Old hand. Okay. Mark, I'm just one question because of the, it seems like we're starting to kind of move towards some suggestion that alewife populations are maybe one of the drivers of lake trout recovery in Lake Champlain. Kind of curious about alewife and terns. Do you think that's alewife populations are driving? They're certainly driving Caspian tern colonization, but do you think they're driving productivity of common terns?
I don't know, actually, Al. We see some alewives. When adult terns are bringing food back, they're bringing the food back whole. Oftentimes that food is, we can see that, primarily smelt and other small fish. We do see alewife up there and dropped, but we don't know if there's a size factor that may limit, especially for smaller chicks. I really don't have any information as to whether or not, the terns are being impacted by the alewives, but I don't know why we didn't see any owl predation up on Papa Squash. There for a while, we have a large new gull nesting site at Grandma's Island, and I thought, well, maybe the owls were shifting their patterns and taking gulls on Grandma's Island, but we didn't seem to find that either. There weren't a rash of great horned owl kills. It could be as simple as the pair that was there didn't breed this year and gave the terns an opportunity. But we've had, a number of years now. Last year we had 119 confirmed fledglings that were banded, but we didn't band all the tern chicks that were up there. And we estimated more than 200 probably fledged last year. So it's really tough to say. I think predation has more of an impact than alewives.
Okay, well, just curious.
So Lael pulled out of a meeting and
Yeah,
is wait-
no, I was gonna. We're gonna stop here. So thanks for that, Mark. We'll move on. We have a new federally listed species that now has been documented in the state of Vermont, the short-nosed sturgeon. And Lael Will from Fish and Wildlife has jumped on to tell us a little bit about this discovery and maybe what it means for us and for Vermont and et cetera. So all yours, Lael.
Thanks. Can I share my screen with you guys?
Yes, yeah.
I just have a couple slides.
We got it.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Can you hear?
And yes.
Okay, we're good to go then.
Miracle.
All right. Yep. So my name is Lael Will, fisheries biologist out of the Springfield Regional Office. I've been with the department since 2012. Prior to that, I was in California. So I have been working a lot on the Connecticut River for the FERC relicensing since 2012. I'm also the technical chair of what formerly was called CRAS, the Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission, which is now the co-op. So I do work a lot with the biologists that work on short-nosed sturgeon down in Massachusetts. So just as a little bit of a background to get everybody on the same page with what I know on the street. So short-nosed sturgeon are ancient bony fish that occur in large rivers, estuaries, and bays. There is a distinct population segment in the Connecticut River, and their upstream historical extent is considered to be Turner's Falls. So that's down in Massachusetts. I have a map on the next slide. Turner's Falls was considered to be a natural barrier for them. And they're a little different in that they don't make large oceanic migrations. They tend to stick in the freshwater, and then they'll poke their noses down into the Long Island Sound and into some of the more saltwater areas. But they're not making big migrations up and down the coastline. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about management. They spawn in fresh water. Again, they'll enter saltwater for feeding and overwintering. They're long-lived, up to 60 years, and age at maturity can be 10 to 18 years, which we know for management and biology, when a fish doesn't reach sexual maturity till later in life, it can create conflict in terms of recruitment and maintaining populations. They're one of the earlier fishes that was listed, so they've been federally listed since 1967. So I talked about Turner's Falls being the upstream historic extent, so that's way down here. I'm assuming you can see my cursor. However, we've been getting a lot of sightings and anecdotal information, and then more compelling information documenting that these fish are actually occurring upstream of Turner's Falls. So in 2017, there was a sturgeon that was caught downstream of Vernon. NOAA is confirming that that's a sturgeon. And then in 2022, there was a video of a student just downstream of Bellows Falls. That's kind of this, or you can't really see the dot, but that's up here. that showed sturgeon swimming around just downstream of Bellows Falls. And then all these other purple dots on the screen are more of the anecdotal sightings that, you know, you get chatter on the street of, hey, I saw a sturgeon here, saw a sturgeon there. So with that, two researchers, James Garner, who is a UMass PhD candidate, and then Kate Buckman, who I've been working a little bit closer with over the past couple of years, decided to do some additional eDNA sampling. There was some DNA sampling done for the FERC studies down at Turner's Falls and Northfield Pump Storage Station. However, those samples were collected at the surface of the water, and since these are benthic species, these guys wanted to go out and actually get water samples from the bottom. So these are the results. Don't necessarily worry about too much about these numbers, but basically the green bars are the lab controls. So they got their GCE scores, which just basically tells you the strength of the signal. So you have more DNA in your sample here than you would maybe down here. The yellow bars are their field controls. So they knew where short-nosed sturgeon were in the river, and those are your GCE scores here. So you can kind of stack that up to what they saw in the lab. And they did, I think, a total of like 11 samples total. And then the red dots that you see on the map are actually their positive results. So they've got fish downstream of Vernon, upstream of Turner's Falls, and then the other one was over in Westmoreland, which isn't all the way up to the dam. It's downstream of the Bellows Falls Dam. But basically, the red dots on the map are showing you where in the river they got their positive DNA, and then the blue, I believe, is coming up as what was negative. So you can kind of see where they're spread out. And then the yellow dot on the map is where they'd had their field controls. So what do I see? You know, in terms of management so far, they are under the jurisdiction of NOAA. They've done some stuff down at Holyoke, so we're able to get more fish upstream. They installed a fish lift, worked out some of the kinks with the fish lift. It was causing some mortality. They've got that worked out. There are downstream measures. I haven't been 100% involved in the Turner's Falls relicensing. So I think something to maybe put on our radar for management is, are they going to be passing fish upstream of Turner's Falls under the new license? I don't know the answer to that. I know that they are having installing downstream protection measures. So basically, if there are fish above the project, trying to get them to like not go through the turbines. And then as I see for Vermont management implications, obviously we're going to want to take a look at flows at some of these Army Corps of Engineer dams. You can have behavioral impacts when you fluctuate flows during the spawn. We may want to take a look at the flows in the Bellows Falls bypass channel. When they did their analysis, sturgeon were not included in that, and that's somewhere they would go. Taking a look at fish passage at Turner's Falls, Vernon and Bellows Falls, we've never seen them in the ladders. They're not the type of ladders that sturgeon would use. But if we want to pass them upstream, we're going to have to evaluate how to best pass those fish. For research, I'm definitely interested in getting more information on the distribution in Vermont. That's primarily going to be benthic eDNA grabs and some of the tributaries like the West and Williams, kind of focusing on where those anecdotal sightings are and going from there. Do we want to look at genetics? There's that researcher from UMass is making conclusions right now about populations above and below Turner's Falls. I think that's highly inappropriate at this point in time. You cannot get population estimates from DNA. There's too many variables there that can impact your strength of your signal, like close proximity to the fish, how much flow is in the water. So I don't recommend using DNA for population estimates. We're probably going to want to identify spawning grounds and spawning habitat because those would be the areas that we would want to protect. And I think, you know, some of the conversation could also be, you know, what do we do absent the feds? Because the feds are probably going to want, well, I know this, they want to get more information on the population above Turner's Falls. And that may take years. So I guess that's my question for the group, is what do we do absent the feds for management? That's all I had.
Thank you for that, Well, very helpful.
So questions? You want me to pull the slides back up? I can send these slides to you as well later.
Sure, that'd be great. One question that I have is just, and it's always weird about the boundary of Vermont and New Hampshire and the Connecticut River. So we are sure we have short-nosed sturgeon in Vermont, on the Vermont side of the Connecticut River.
Well, it's really squirrely because management, number one, the feds take jurisdiction no matter where they are. And number two, in terms of management, it gets defined differently. What's the Connecticut River for management and regulations is up to the first highway bridge. But that's in Vermont. So how do you define that boundary? Is it, would the main stem be considered New Hampshire, even though portions of it are in Vermont? Are we going with the first highway bridge as our boundary? I guess it depends on how you define it, but the sturgeon from the video was in Vermont. It was in Vermont, but what waters is it? The main stem or first highway bridge?
Okay, maybe shouldn't have started with a technicality.
Well, we
Yeah.
will need to define it, and I guess, I guess it would be modeled after, there's other federally listed dwarf wedge mussel in the main stem. Like, how is that applied there? Because I could see sturgeon coming up into the West River or potentially the Williams River or the Black River, some of our larger main stem rivers. We don't have anything on the tribs yet, and I want to focus above Bellows as well, because they may be above Bellows if they're above Vernon.
Yeah.
But the lat long from the video is on the Vermont side. I think some of the DNA is more in the middle channel.
I thought that Connecticut was all New Hampshire.
Right. That's the question is, are we talking about fishing regs and management? I mean, we've been part of the FERC relicensing and have made, a lot of impact on the outcome of that, even though it's managed under New Hampshire. It's still getting a Vermont water quality cert because it's shared. So I think the responsibility, even if it is solely in the feds, we will have a seat at the table for management.
And is it likely that they're getting into the Black and the Williams?
I don't know. I don't know. I would think the West, for spawning. Matt?
Yeah, I was just curious. It sounds like Turner's Falls was regarded as a natural barrier. What do we know or conjecture about how they got past that? And what are they doing up here? This is just a natural, they didn't need assisted migration. They're moving north on their own. Like, what's the larger picture?
I don't know, how do black crappie get in half of our water bodies? We don't know, and NIMS that's the number one question people ask. Well, how did they get there? And, NIMS has come back and it's like, we don't know, but they're here. So.
Well, this is Rich.
Hi, Rich.
The same question can be asked about black-nosed dace and slimy sculpin. They got up the river when the river was Lake Hitchcock after the passage of the last glaciation. So maybe they went up with the rest of the fish before the lake became a river, before the rebound transferred the lake into a river. So that's probably how they got there.
So you're suggesting they've been there all along. We just only recently detected them?
Yes, the rarity could have accounted for that.
Interesting.
And you talk
Thanks.
to the anglers and they're like, you guys are a bunch of idiots. We've been seeing sturgeon forever. So, you know,
Along with all the catamounts, right?
yeah. And, you know, there's even videos out there of like one in a cornfield and I'm like, my instinct was like, no, that's a pike. And then I talked to him, oh yeah, that's a pike. So, you know, but the DNA is hard to deny. Especially in a river of that size, to be able to detect the DNA means they're there and it's not just one fish.
So Lael, this is a question, or New Hampshire's going to have to react to this as well. Do you know what the sort of reaction factor is for your counterparts in New Hampshire right now?
The reaction's going to be they're under the jurisdiction of NOAA. That's the reaction. But I think, you know, it behooves us to think about what we can do for these fish aside from the feds, because, you know, if they're listed in Vermont and the Army Corps of Engineers is jerking around flows on the West River, you know, that may be something that Vermont would want to address.
Because of that video sighting that is technically, can be argued, was in Vermont, that's what makes it automatically state listed now. So it would help to write that up, if it's not already written up somewhere, to write up a summary of this is why we say it's in Vermont in order to back up our state listing.
Yeah.
The sooner you guys can get something out to the public, the better, because it's going in the water quality cert. There's stakeholders out there that if you looked at the website, there's nothing indicating that it's now state listed, even just an informational page. People want to know, and we're at a very critical time right now with this FERC relicensing, where the water quality certs are being drafted right now, and there's going to be public comment on that. So when the public, for example, CRC, looks at this and they're like, there's nothing on the website that indicates that these are now listed, it's going to create a little confusion.
And I confirmed with Hannah Smith that, you know, you don't need any rulemaking, that it's listed now, as long as we can document the presence. And then we could put them on the website. I mean, we could at least add them and make that change on the website at that point. But we do need some kind of summary to document presence, so we have that backup.
Yeah. And I did have IT pull the lat long off of that video, because that's in the metadata. So there's no question about where the video was taken, you know, looking at the background. Oh, I think it's this rock below, you know, you have a lat long. Yeah. You can't question that. And I'm hoping to really get out and do more DNA this summer. I got a little Kemmerer sampler that I can drop a water bottle down and get DNA from that.
Well, would you be able to write up something? It doesn't have to be really detailed, but
yep, I can summarize kind of what I put together today. It's a little bit background.
Yeah, mostly about just the validation of the documentation. That would be great. But the background would be great with it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd rather write more than less, and then you can pull out what you want.
Yeah, thanks.
Lael, could you also send that to me? I've just written down in my notes here to do. I think probably should come initially from the fish SAG and move on up, just like other listings would normally do. And I can certainly fast track that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing, sorry, is that we did include it. I did the write-up for it for the updated wildlife action plan, so it will be included in there.
Good.
What was the date of this confirmed sighting? The video?
Yeah, it was recorded in 2022, but we didn't get it until just now.
Okay.
And then that was because Margaret was talking to, it was like on the street, like, oh, of course they're downstream. Of course they're in Vermont. I have a video. So it was like, we got it like 2 years too late.
And it's not been publicized. Is it been in the news at all? I mean, has it been publicized in any way?
The DNA hit the ground running, I think, because there was media and stuff involved, and the DNA is our most solid evidence. So the video is helpful, but the DNA is really what hit the ground for the newspapers and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember if that's on your website. Is that on Fish and Wildlife's website? There is an article out there. Maybe it's a Vermont Public thing or something. I can't remember, but there's an online article about the DNA.
There is, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I caution about making any conclusions about population estimates using DNA. There's just, we're not there yet.
Last thing, Lael, and I would, say just use your judgment on this. But, kind of wondering to save you some words and also just to, kind of get the word out there that it's there, is to just have a link to the federal recovery plan. Because it seems like, number one, there's a lot of, like you're saying, this is a distinct population segment. There's a lot about particular populations, and also, some of that background that you're saying that you wanted to write. That would probably save you some words as well.
The NOAA recovery plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing's a little dated. I reviewed that for the, I can pull some stuff in, but then I had Micah. It's so old that we've moved beyond a lot of the stuff that's in there. They were talking about different populations. So I can pull what I can from there, but
okay.
A link might be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
I just caution, it's from like 1994, so we've come a long way since then.
Yeah.
But yeah,
right,
I'll just write something up, and you guys can, take what you want and, leave what you don't.
Thanks, Lael.
Thank you, Lael.
Thanks so
Okay.
much. Appreciate your time.
Take care. Yep.
That was good.
Yeah, so, I've lost our lead. We're 15 minutes behind now. Matt, what's your preference? Do you want to take a lunch break? Would you prefer to go now?
Either way is all right with me. I don't want to stand between everyone and their lunches, but I also don't want everyone to just fall asleep after their lunches.
Yeah. We would never fall asleep. Flora Sag, no way.
I would certainly hope not.
Yeah.
No, that fish is a very hard act to follow. That is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is cool.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
And as Rich
did have
knows,
some
not much about fish.
Yeah.
We did have some pretty cool plant rediscoveries this year, though.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we break for lunch? If we can maybe keep it to like 20 minutes or something like that, or 25. We'll get a little closer to getting back on schedule and go there. So let's shoot for 12:50-ish. What, 6 meetings? I reminded you about that.
Thank you for that.
May never happen again.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt, it is all yours.
Okay, I should probably ask everyone to get up and do some jumping jacks or something, so you don't all fall asleep now after having had your lunches. But
we're actually mostly still eating.
Well, that works too. All right. Okay, well, so diving in here, SAG Flora continues to have great membership, very active membership, at least 11 folks coming to each of our meetings and participating each year, and it's just underlies the point that I think, as with many other SAGs, these groups serve an important professional networking and information exchange function in addition to kind of our core jobs advising the ESC. Excuse me. I guess we had three meetings this year in addition to our annual field trip, and then as usual we dovetail one of those meetings with the annual New England Plant Conservation Program Vermont Task Force meeting, which is a partnership with the Native Plant Trust and their extensive volunteer management efforts around rare plant monitoring. So just diving right into all the bullet points in our report here. We did not have any listings action this year, either listings or delistings, but I will note that we have several that are in the hopper, and we did do some field work and some work drafting some potential documentation, particularly for a couple of delistings that we are considering, and expect that we'll be able to move those forward to this committee sometime this year, I expect, sooner rather than later if need be. I'm happy to report, and I say this with a little bit of trepidation, but there were no unpermitted takings this year of plants that we're aware of. Of course, it's the unpermitted ones that are harder to know happen. But looking back at past reports, it looks like this is probably the first time in at least 5 years that we've been able to say that. So hopefully that is a positive thing, and not just that we don't know about things that have happened. On the permitting front, we had a few permits, not too many this year. Won't go into any depth on them, but the collections permit from New England Botanical Society, the research permit related to Appalachian Jacob's Ladder. So those have gone through this committee, and then a couple we have in process. We'll be talking about the marsh horsetail permit in a little while. And then we have another one that's sort of still in development for Ram's Head Lady Slipper that hopefully will be moving on to this group by next meeting, hopefully. So that's sort of the core pieces here. Then a quick recap on our summer field trip. Excuse me. You may recall, every year the Flora Advisory Group, organizes a field trip for our members and other associates that usually is aimed at some particular botanical target where there's some rare species records in need of sort of renewal in one way or another. This year we went to the Root Pond Marshes, or fens really. This is part of the TNC Buckner Preserve down in Benson. You might know it better as the Shaw Mountain area. The area is known for the mountains and calcareous cliffs and so forth, but there's really extensive calcareous wetlands there as well. And it was the site of historical species in the state, water pimpernel, Salmonellus valorandi. This hadn't been seen since, I think it was, the last record was in the 90s. This is our sole Vermont location that we have any specific locale for. There's, I think, one other historically known site that just has a very vague location, so we don't really know where it is, other than I think in Middlebury, I believe it is. But that was sort of renewing that record, or refinding that was our primary goal with the field trip, and fortunately we succeeded. We found a small population in the same basic area, not the exact same spot, but that was exciting to see. I'd never actually seen the species before, but was fortunate to stumble across it on our lunch break, basically. So it's still extant there. Did a little bit of searching at a potential spot in Middlebury later on in the season, but without any success. But at least we know it's still extant in the state. it's just for context, it's generally a more coastal species of coastal marshes, and so it's a little bit of an enigmatic site this far inland, but there it is, and the records go back quite some time, so it's been around. In addition to that kind of primary target of our search, there were of course a bunch of other rare species there. There was one other globally vulnerable taxon there. There's a pondweed, Hill's pondweed, that is actually it's ranked S3 in the state, but in the larger perspective, sort of similar to wood turtles, it's much rarer. So it was good to re-document that one and know that it's still doing fine there. And then a host of other rare and uncommon species in the wetlands at that site, as well as the uplands that where I think more of the past survey effort had happened. So it was great to be able to get to that site as a whole group. I guess the one sour note of the trip was that we discovered a infestation of emerald ash borer in the black ash within the wetlands there, and that was the first documentation on that preserve. Maybe even in Benson, I'm not sure. I need to follow up on that and probably get a report submitted to Savannah. I don't think she's probably left the meeting, but so that's a quick field trip recap. And then I guess to follow on the short-nosed sturgeon, I did put another a link in the chat. There's many news stories about this first item, the rediscovery of false mermaid weed, which hadn't been seen in the state for over a century. And many of you probably already heard this story, came out earlier last summer, just kind of a remarkable string of events. I think it was Molly Perrin, I think, from Fish and Wildlife Department, had photographed another listed species, Allium canadense, at a site she was working at, shared it with Grace Glenn, our state botanist, and Grace was of course able to confirm that species, but then noticed this other little thing poking into the view frame that was this 100-year-old historical species that just popped up. So that was really exciting, and it received a tremendous amount of national media attention. Went for, I just linked to the VT Digger story there because you can actually see it, but there's stories in the New York Times, and it went on all the major news media outlets, which is pretty remarkable for a botanical story. So that was pretty exciting for all of us. The other major refind this year was also something Grace stumbled across at the end of the season. I shouldn't say stumbled across. She was very much keeping an eye out for it. A tiny little sort of ephemeral species of exposed river shore habitats, historically known from the southern part of the Connecticut River in Vermont, down in Vernon. She'd searched a bunch of the known sites for it, and then kind of in a last-ditch effort at the end of the season made a quick stop. And lo and behold, there it was, this tiny little plant. I wish I had a picture to show you it. Though I have to admit, it's not terribly showy as rare plants go. And maybe its name suggests that, pygmy weed, a tiny little annual species of seasonally exposed drawdown shorelines. So great to know that one is still alive and kicking in the state as well. So that's a pretty good year with 3 historical species redocumented for the state. And of course, loads of other new occurrences of listed and other rare species that I'm not going to try to summarize or go into it all here. But then in terms of other activity of the group, sort of a subcommittee of us spent quite a bit of time working on S-rank updates. And this, of course, fed right into the Wildlife Action Plan, Species of Greatest Conservation Need updates. This involved, it was somewhere around 60 to 100 species, maybe a little bit more than that. I didn't bother to comb through and get the exact tally. We try to have this somewhat regular process of reviewing our entire rare and uncommon species list, but of course this is many hundreds of species. So this was an attempt to kind of just pull out ones where we knew there was we'd had a bunch of additional information, and we could kind of prioritize them for re-ranking, and with ranks moving in both directions, of course. And this was also, we dovetailed this with an effort kind of spearheaded by Everett Marshall to actually rank all of our common species as well as rare species. And that's particularly beneficial, actually, not so much to us, but to surrounding states and provinces who are trying to get a broader perspective on the rarity of species in their region. Certainly when we're proposing listings and so forth, we look to, ranks through the compilations in NatureServe to see what adjacent states are listing species at. So it's sort of providing a reciprocal basis for that and actually getting things into those S4 and S5 ranks, which tend to get under prioritized and kind of put in these catch-all categories that don't really provide information to other people that might be trying to understand, well, is it actually really common here, or is it just that we don't know very much about it at all, and so we haven't ranked it? So I believe that effort was finalized. I think Everett's completed that with our input, and it was actually pretty interesting because we ended up in that process of reviewing what were nominally considered to be more common species. We actually pulled out at least a handful of species that we decided, after all, these aren't actually so common. These are probably, I think most of them ended up in the S3 category, or at least brought things onto our radar screen that we needed to pay a little bit more attention to and evaluate in more detail in the future. So that was beneficial, certainly. As I said, that S ranking update effort fed right into the SGCN updates, and Flag provided review of those lists on a sort of a categorical basis. We didn't go through species by species like many of the other groups, but for plants, we really use the S ranks as a directly translating the S ranks into which species would go on the list and what their sort of high or medium priority. So basically our entire rare and uncommon plant species list of several hundred species is the SGCN list. I guess the major change for plants this year was the inclusion of all S3 ranked species as well. And those I think we put in the watch list category as opposed to higher medium priority. That's a lot of species to add, but at this point with no plant related funding prospects really out there, there was kind of no reason not to put them there on the off chance that that something becomes available. So that was the major change. Otherwise, basically S1 and S2 translate right into the SGCN high and medium priority categories. I guess just in terms of other discussions that didn't bear directly on permitting or ranking, but where our expertise was helpful. We had an extended discussion with Steve Keller of UVM, who's part of a group of folks doing some alpine common garden experiments up on Mount Mansfield and a bunch of other sites throughout New England, and maybe even partnering up into Quebec to try to better understand some of the genetic and environmental variables going on with some of our alpine species. No permitting involved given the species they're working with there, but it was great that Steve brought that to us and we could have an exchange around that, as well as, in the future benefit from the results of their research. We, over the course of various meetings, spent a fair bit of time with rare plant management activities of one sort or another, a bunch of different species, partnerships with VCE and Native Plant Trust involved in many of these. I didn't put the details in here, but it's something that we're continuing to work with both those partners on. flooding impacts to some of our riparian rare plants was something that came up, and really most of this was focused around our federally listed Jessop's milk vetch, which you may recall is a Connecticut River species, virtually a single site endemic globally. It only occurs on the Connecticut River and sort of Vermont, New Hampshire border. Unfortunately, it's kind of taken it in the teeth with these mid-season flooding events, especially 2 years in a row. Things were not looking particularly good as of this year, is my understanding. Fortunately, some of the past work to actually establish additional populations upstream and even into a tributary stream or helpful in spreading the risk, and some of those sites fared a little bit better than others. But overall, unfortunately, the picture isn't great. So I think we, to some extent, have to kind of wait and see what's happening with that. And that's, I should say, that's an ongoing partnership with the folks at the Native Plant Trust, who have a regular cycle of growing transplants that then get set out to try to augment some of those populations and sometimes establish additional subpopulations. The other one, riparian species, is the cut-leafed anemone, which is, again, just a single site in Vermont, has been in long-term decline, probably related to climate change, but excuse me, certainly the mid-season flooding effects have not been beneficial to its trajectory. So just a couple of our riparian rare species that are facing additional challenges of late, and I guess probably continued prospects for that being an issue. I know that we need to spend a lot of time, again, many different discoveries of new sites for listed and rare species, as well as some other sort of botanical curiosities, if you will. There's sort of a swarm of sort of puzzling arrowhead or Sagittaria species in the lower Winooski River. A couple of different species have been identified there that seem to be huge range outliers, and folks are still kind of trying to understand what's really growing there and why there might be this swarm of species from far south or from coastal regions occurring there. We don't really know. Had a little bit of discussion around tracking of rare hybrid populations. This came up in relation to a new hybrid that I think Daniela Zwarski found a really nice population of. It's a hybrid club moss, Lycopodium exgilmanii. But we have a number of other hybrids that are, in some cases, are tracked if they seem to be a long-term persistent through vegetative propagation, but in most cases, those are not entities that Heritage tracks. As hybrids, they're deemed sort of not to be of conservation significance in some sense. And then just a last note, we had some discussions around the status of ginseng in the state. I think this came up. Oh, I might have prompted this at one point through some questions with the Agency of Ag folks, and just information flows between those folks that handle the actual ginseng permitting and folks at the Heritage program, and information flows not always being great. So we had some discussions around that. I guess this is somewhat tangential to the core work of the SAG, but just the note to say that Art Gilman continues to spearhead efforts to keep our understanding of Vermont's flora up to date through his work compiling basically new species records for the state as addenda to his New Flora of Vermont publication. He's gone through, I think, 3 editions to that book, which is, I think, a decade old now. Seems like it was only yesterday that it came out, but we've had a lot a lot has changed in the last decade, and he's expecting another round of editions to be published, I think, next month. And then just the last mundane business item, we did establish Google Drive for the SAG in order to make all of our documents accessible to all the members and sort of have an archiving location, since it was decided that it didn't make sense to have access into the team's repository that the ESC maintains. So that's what we were up to over the past year. And happy to answer questions that anyone have, or Carla, if you have anything to chime in, by all means.
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Matt. That was great. And I think just in the interest of time, we'll keep rolling here. And I will turn it over to Rich for Fish SAG.
Okay. The Fish SAG did not meet in 2024. We did get together via email reviewing the Lampricide application for the Winooski River. Before I get into that, I just wanted to mention we're down to 7 members now. Ken Cox, longtime member and former chair, retired from the group last year, and he's certainly going to be missed. He had quite a bit of institutional knowledge. So we are down to 7. Yeah, the commenting on the Winooski Lampricide was the only thing that we did traditionally, specifically last year, although some of our members were involved in other activities that are related, and I'll get into those later. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came in with an application for an E&T permit at 1.3 times minimum lethal concentration. And minimum lethal concentration, as I've explained before, and probably you've all forgotten, understandably, is concentration that is supposed to kill 100% of lamprey over a period of 9 hours. And it's determined by laboratory study. The reason we use this, or they use this, rather than just a concentration per liter, is that the concentration varies from the river, even within the same river, with alkalinity and pH. So they have to get an idea what the alkalinity and pH are first, and then they calculate an MLC. So we use MLC. The channel darter was the species that we were most concerned with in the Winooski River. It is an endangered species, along with lake sturgeon, American brook lamprey, and eastern sand darter are threatened. So we were looking at the channel darter. The concentration of the channel darter, the highest concentration observed in laboratory tests that had no effect was 1.2, which is what we suggested for the treatment. So that was our recommendation. Bring it down to 1.2 to protect the channel darters. Okay, so I will get to listing our short list of recommendations here. So the number 1 recommendation was in the concentration. The number 2 recommendation was to continue the darter and stonecat monitoring study that was conducted 2017 through 2019. That almost sputtered to a start last year when Bernie Piancat from Fish and Wildlife asked the work group, well, do you want to get together again? And I was pretty optimistic at that point, but it fizzled out, unfortunately. But hopefully we can pick that up eventually. But that was our recommendation, to include that study during a period of successive years. Recommendation 3 was to not treat before October 15th to protect lake sturgeon. Young of the year lake sturgeon, when they first hatch, are very vulnerable to lampricides, but they quickly gain resistance as the year goes on. And by the time you run into late fall, September, October, their resistance is well over 1.0, 1.2. So that's good news. And so far, Fish and Wildlife Service has met that deadline. Sunderland Brook is a tributary that runs into the Winooski River just below the falls. It represents a refugia for sea lamprey during treatment. They're getting uncomfortable with the lampricide. They're going to want to find fresh water. That's the main tributary in that section. So what Fish and Wildlife Service has done is they put a brick of TFM at the mouth to discourage lamprey from moving up during the treatment. We ask them to set it down as far towards the mouth as they can, because there's an American brook lamprey population within that brook. Most of it is probably distributed upstream, but as a precaution, we ask them to put it down and as far downstream, avoiding American brook lampreys as much as they could. Yeah, and a minor recommendation regarding the reporting of non-target lampreys. In the past, Fish and Wildlife Service has reported silver lampreys and American brook lamprey mortalities as a percentage of total. This is really not helpful for us. Could be one American brook lamprey, could be 10, depending on how many sea lamprey they caught. So we asked them simply to list the mortalities of non-target lampreys along with all the rest of the non-target fish. That's pretty much all of our official business. 3 or 4 of our members have been involved in commenting on an extensive eDNA project that is being proposed and will be submitted to the Lake Champlain Basin Program for SGCM species. We're pretty excited about this. This is a big time proposal. They're going to be sampling everywhere, and this will, of course, help the fish SAG and the ESC in terms of prioritizing conservation needs as well as lampricide permitting conditions. So we've been active in commenting on that. I've already mentioned that 3 of our members are involved with the Wildlife Action Plan for 2025, putting together the fish list. We've added 10 species to the 29 existing. We have 39 species, which pretty much makes up half of the fish species in the state, half the native fish species in the state. We added all cold water species to that, even though some of them, like brook trout, are very common. This was, of course, nod to climate change, the threat of thermal issues. Lastly, I've been working on coordinating agency-wide fish distribution database that both DEC and Fish and Wildlife can share for fish. And it sounds like it'd be fairly easy, but the existing spreadsheet was a real mess. And so I've been involved in lining everything up, making the format consistent. The entries have been made over a period of about 20 years. And depending on who made the entry and what mood they were in, it was just quite a mess. And I'm cleaning it up and I'm updating it with information that perhaps DEC, which I work for, used to work for, had, plus any information that Fish and Wildlife has that they haven't reported yet. So I'm working with Will Eldridge on this, and Jim Deschler from DEC. So when I get done with mine, I'm going to give it over to Will. And Will is going to add any data that I haven't included, and we'll be able to map each one of these on a species map, which would be really cool. Been a long time coming. I think that's about all I have. And of course, the short-nosed sturgeon is a big deal, and we've already talked about that.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Rich.
Oh, and I apologize for not providing my report. It's in draft form. I'll send it soon.
No worries. Have you, I was going to ask if you talked, with Kent or the BCE about the fish database and Atlas of Life, and whether or not what you're putting together might be compatible with a place where to be accessed by just, beyond the agency.
Yeah, we haven't got that far yet. Right now, we talked about initially putting it onto a database, and for various reasons, some divisions were able to purchase databases, some weren't. So we avoided that, and right now I'm just working with a spreadsheet. So it's in kind of a draft form now. We're about 9,500 records at this point. So no, we haven't gotten all that farther. Work on the wildlife action plan is kind of taken over that.
Yeah,
I'm kind of juggling my time.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth checking in with Kent or somebody at BCE to see if there's some compatibility there. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah.
Question for you, Rich, about the lake trout in Lake Champlain. And apparently I was reading recently about the population seems to be breeding on its own within the lake, which is historically a new thing. What do you guys at this fish SAG think about what's going on there, and if there are any implications for lamprey management, and if they're seeing any difference in this population in terms of their resistance to sea lampreys? What's going on there?
Yeah, good question. Questions. I haven't heard much about that. I know that talking to Ellen Marsden, they started noting natural reproduction at least 5 or 6 years ago, and it continues to increase. It's good news, but in a way, it would have been better if the native strain of lake trout hadn't been depleted to a point that it didn't exist anymore back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. So what we're seeing probably is a population of strains that have been tested for resistant to lampricide, so they're non-native strains. But still, it's a good thing in terms of survival of these fish, because just throwing in hatchery fish as adults or even fry, they haven't lived there long enough to basically develop evolutionary tactics to avoid being predated on and basically avoid mortality. So you get this group that's, it's non-native lake trout, but it's growing up within the system under this force of pressure, this mortality force. So in that respect, it's pretty good. The only thing I've heard in terms of management is that Fish and Wildlife may have been reducing the number of fish that they stock. And they're carefully monitoring this. So I think they're going to be adjusting, working with Ellen and others in terms of the ratio of naturally reproduced versus stocked.
Great.
Well, there's I think it's in UVM news. it's, I don't know if you'd call it like an exit interview with Owen Morrison, who was officially retired now.
I read that in
Yeah.
UVM magazine.
Yeah.
I actually do read that thing out. Can you believe it?
Nice. All right. Just donate to the Rubenstein School, Paul. That's all we need. Complete the circle.
You may need it the way things are going in down in Washington. So we'll see if we can help you guys out.
All right. We could build a new wing, the Wizarek wing.
Wizarek.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just quickly, if there's time, Rich, if I heard you correctly, you said that the lake sturgeon showed increasing resistance to the lampricide over, in essentially the same age class over the course of a field season. And I'm wondering if there's an explanation to that. Is it, is it plasticity, or are they're getting smart and learning how to get away from the stuff, or what?
I don't think it's avoidance now. It's physiological. It's pretty surprising, actually, when you consider that, they live to be 100 years old and they develop fairly slowly. But this was a direct result of a couple of studies that studied the toxicity at various levels. And that's what they came up with, which is really good news, because if they hadn't, there wouldn't be any lake sturgeon left.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Rich. Appreciate it. And your continued diligence on lampricide treatment. Appreciate that as well.
Since 1990.
Yeah.
Established in 1990.
Yeah. Okay, John, go ahead with, we got a permit annual report here. What I've been doing is just kind of making John as his own SAG essentially here. So where we've got SAG annual reports, I've just put a permitting folder in there as well. So John's got got his own space.
Okay. It was a relatively quiet year for permitting, particularly for development-related permits. We had a number of research permit applications come through, and renewals, and as well as new ones. But I think the main ones that this group had to wrestle over, there were only a couple that really came before the committee this year, where you got to the point of decision making, and then several that have dragged on for months because of various issues. One coming up that I think we'll talk about now is the Barton Solar Project. The Flora SAG is weighed in on it. It's renewal of a permit for a solar project where there's endangered plant that I think is being recommended to be taken off the endangered species list. The plant seems to be doing okay despite the shade provided by the solar project. And this would be the third in a series of permits issued to this to the developer, because it's a 25-year project and we can only issue permits for 5 years at a time. Mm-hmm. It's not that the project has changed in any way. Though they have asked, we in the last permit, we said after X number of years, if monitoring seems to show that the plant is doing okay, you can request waiving ongoing monitoring. They requested that. So I asked the specific question in front of the committee today. But maybe before I don't know if you want to jump there first, or just talk about the bigger picture of permits and just see if there's more information you want me to provide you about permits. I think I've done a better job this time of loading up the committee's SharePoint with not just the permits that we've asked that you've directly worked on, but the ones that sort of are approved by, as a class, like renewal of scientific collection permits and education permits that really don't involve direct taking. I tried to put all those in the folder too, so you can see what else is going on out there.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm wondering if it makes sense to go to the Barton Solar, since you kind of introduced it. Maybe go there first and then come back. Where am I here? That's all, never mind. I need to see a little bit more here. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I guess I probably should have said something while I'm looking at it. This is some of the history of the Barton Solar. So you can see some of the past advice and the permits that have been issued in the past. You got the 2010, 2014 monitoring reports, et cetera. So this, as John was mentioning, is an ongoing takings permit for marsh horsetail. Has been something that is, as John mentioned, a species that maybe should be delisted, but also one in which it seems like has not been affected negatively or significantly negatively by the solar. So this is the SAG Flora advice here that I've got pulled up. So should a permit be granted, yes or no? Yes, unanimously agree. And these are the conditions from Flora SAG. I don't know, you can all read that on the screen. I'll say, Matt, if you want to add anything to what there is here, feel free.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a lot to add other than to, I guess, just sort of say, I think we had really minimal concerns with this, as has been said. This species has been proposed for delisting. Florisag put it forward. ESC as a whole has approved that. So it's just waiting for the secretary to put that forward through rulemaking. And that was just to refresh people's memory. That's primarily just that we've discovered more of it than we thought there used to be. And so the species as a whole is doing better than we thought, and is more widespread in terms of watersheds and sites around the state that it occurs. And some of them are really quite large, including the population at the solar installation here. I guess I will acknowledge that Florisag, and before the project had been built, when it was initially being permitted, Florisag had actually opposed it. I think that was before my time, and it was, I think, probably largely on the grounds of just the scale of the impact. It was a fairly there's a lot of overlap with the population, but it did move forward, and as Alan said, it does seem to have tolerated coexistence with the solar site, and particularly with the mowing regime management of that site, which is conditioned to occur after September 15th. So it's basically occurring after the plants have done their growing for the year, and are headed towards senescence and dying back for this season. There was I think an infraction of that time frame at one point during the life of the project, but as far as I know, that was rectified, and we're recommending that mowing time frame continue. But we were okay with the applicant's request to suspend further monitoring of the project, just quick recap of the history. Initially, there was a fairly extensive and elaborate monitoring regime set up for the species across the site. And then after a number of years and seemingly good results or coexistence, that was scaled back to just a handful of monitoring plots. And now the request is suspended altogether. I think that had been previously approved to suspend monitoring altogether, and if I'm remembering right, and we're okay with that. The past monitoring seems to suggest within a given small area, within a plot, the number of stems goes up and down in a year or across years, but the population as a whole seems to have expanded throughout the installation, actually. So it actually overlaps even more with the installation than it did when it was constructed. And so even though I think the most recent monitoring numbers suggest at the plot scale, there are maybe somewhat fewer stems than some of the previous monitoring suggested. The overall population footprint is much larger, and so the aggregate population seems to be doing quite well, is the sense that we have of it. And the shading doesn't seem to be an issue for the species. I've actually this past year found a couple of new populations that are growing in at least partly shaded swamp kind of conditions, forested swamp conditions. So it's clearly has some level of shade tolerance. That's not an issue. So, so basically we're supportive of it, the renewal moving forwards. But if anyone has questions, I'm certainly happy to address them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. I guess maybe, go ahead, Paul.
I think you're muted, Paul.
Sorry about that. My question was, if the entire population at Barton disappeared for whatever reason, would the SAG group still consider delisting? Is the population robust enough around the rest of the state that it would still be the case?
I think so. I mean, I hesitate to speak for everyone in the SAG unilaterally, but I think so. I off the top of my head, I think our current number of populations, extant populations around the state was at least 24, maybe over 30. And as I said, we're continuing to find new populations. At least I know I personally have found new populations each of the last couple of years, some of them in entirely new watersheds and so forth. So it seems to be doing pretty well, and particularly within the Barton area and that watershed, the population is quite extensive beyond the solar site itself, up and down that river corridor. It seems to be pretty widespread, so it's hard to imagine it disappearing entirely from that area. Yeah.
I was just thinking, if the management changed drastically, for some reason, because it was not a requirement to monitor it or manage it, what would the impact be? So.
Yeah, and part of the population that occurs basically at that site is the entire population there is not subject to the mowing management. Parts of it are in I think it's a power line right of way there, and so they're not in the actively managed zone. So there's, I guess, a variety of management practices happening there. Some of it being essentially passive.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I was going to say, maybe I'll ask a request for a motion to essentially move forward with a yes vote on this permit application with the conditions that the Flora SAG has put forward.
So moved.
Okay. Oh, okay. We have 2 firsts and a second. Any further discussion, comments, or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? All right, great. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you. So one, maybe quick one, and then maybe we could bring up the Fairhaven project. So last year, Alan, you in particular, about the committee had asked about how effective the permits are that we issue for wind facilities. And every time we go through sort of a renewal process, we keep, fine tuning or ratcheting down, or tightening some of the reporting elements or requiring elements. And then every year the facilities find some other way to, like, oops, we lost track of our monitoring information, or there was another anomaly and our system didn't catch it. There are currently 2 facilities that are asking for their permits to be renewed, Georgia Mountain and Kingdom Wind. And we have, so we, meaning Noel Dodge, who analyzes the data from those sites, has found some anomalies in their reporting. And we've met a couple times with our legal counsel and still waiting to get letters out to them saying, the potential violations and asking what to do. And we know what we'd like to see, but it's been dragging, those things have been dragging on for a few months because of the 7,000 things that our legal counsel is responsible for. So these things are still going on. We're in theory, the wind facilities are already modifying their procedures to prevent such problems, but we don't have, we've not met with them yet to refine those things. So it's not exactly where we'd like to be. And it's just one of those pieces of just being overwhelmed, and the amount of energy for these two to work on these 2 projects is, and number of people we need to pull together is just, gotten the best of us. Hoping for a better report next year, if not sooner.
What is, is there presumably going to be a period of time when they're in operation, when they're operating and without a permit?
If we can't get to that before late April, yes, it is possible.
Okay, all right.
And I hope that we don't get there, and I hope that we have even the proposed renewal, a new permit to show to you before then that addresses some of those problems, and at least on paper will help avoid future problems.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd love to see that rather than it be on Noel Dodge to do all the analysis of their data, that we put it on the applicant to do more of this analysis. And of course, they say they can't, but we know that they can slice and dice their data as far as how many, milliwatts they produce every millisecond. They should be able to tell us when something is wrong with the, out of whack with turbine spinning.
Yeah. Any other questions for John? Okay, well, what I was kind of suggesting at the beginning of the meeting is that because the other permit that we want to talk about, this is not to actually vote on, we don't have SAG advice at this point, does have a location confidential And because the location confidential is attached to a relatively broad group of taxa that actually makes it very obvious as to what species we're talking about here. We thought it might make sense to go into executive session with just the ESC and the SAG chairs who that have taxa involved in this. So this would be Mark and Jim. If people are good with that, I thought maybe it just makes sense to adjourn the regular meeting here, and not that we would come back out of executive session to adjourn, but we would go into executive session and everyone else can reclaim an extra 12 minutes of your day and answer as many emails as you possibly can during that time. But I guess, I mean, if people are good with that, before I do it, I just want to say thanks to all the SAG chairs. I mean, it's just amazing work that all of you do with your committees, and obviously the ESC could not do our job without you. So thanks for everything, and some really great work and some really great reports, and yeah, just thanks for your dedication. It's great.
And I'll add that Fish and Wildlife couldn't do its job, not very well anyway, without all of you.
All right. Good. Well, thanks. We're officially adjourned, I guess.
Alan, yeah, I just want, I don't know for sure, but just in terms of the letter of the open meetings law,
oh, yeah,
we might need to adjourn after the executive session, you know.
Okay.
To adjourn.
Yeah, that's fine.
Now,
yeah.
you know, we might need to go in, do our thing, come out, and then adjourn officially. I don't know, but that's a suspicion.
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
Also, you do need to vote to go into
Right.
executive
Yeah.
session.
Yeah. Good point.
And
yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, whoever makes the motion to indicate the nature of the business to be discussed during executive session and why you're going into it. So the confidential location.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Do we need to cite the subchapter in the statute, like what provision that makes us exempt from the public meetings, you know, being public now? Like, I know that there's a, you know, dozen or so, or maybe more by now, specific reasons you can go into executive session. Do we need to name that?
Did Hannah?
She said she was going to send it to me, but I haven't gotten it.
Okay.
But I can, I'm not a lawyer, but give me 1 second and I at least have experience in open meeting law. So give me 1 second.
Yeah, I do too for my days as a newspaper.
Just one moment, please.
Okay.
I don't say that it says we need to say it, but it is in 1 VSA 313 is about executive sessions. And it lists the reasons and you have to find that it's that reason. Contracts, labor relations. I'm trying to find what this would fit under. Negotiate. No, that's not it.
You think we I guess we haven't done this in a while.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Yeah, records exempt from the access to public records provisions of section 316.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking for it here. I mean, there are, you have to choose. I mean, you have to choose one of these reasons. You know.
I think it's 6.
All right, well, I will make a motion that the Endangered Species Committee at 1:52 go into executive session under 1 VSA 313, item number 6 regarding records exempt from the public record.
Yeah.
And we put that forward as a motion.
I'll second that.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thanks, Brian. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are in executive session, so we will ask.
I can take a